Convening the House Investigative Committee to investigate compliance with audit numbers 19-12 and 21-01 on September 20th, 2021, 9:00 a.m. In conference room 325 in the state capitol, as well as via video conference on Zoom. With us today, we have members of the committee and Auditor Les Kondo, who will be presenting on the process, findings, and recommendations set forth in audit report number 21-01, to be followed by questions with members. The House Investigative Committee to investigate compliance with audit numbers 19. Okay, we may have some type of technical difficulties. So to our public, we ask for your patience and we thank you for tuning in. Before we start with the presentation, I have a couple of announcements to make, administrative announcements. So first, members, for Thursday, September 24th, our meeting with, or our hearing with Chair Phyllis Shimabukuro-Geyser was noticed for 9:00 a.m. I will be amending that notice for 11:00 a.m. And over the weekend, I consulted with Chair and her counsel, and she has graciously agreed to move that to accommodate scheduling for some committee members, namely myself. So thank you very much to Board of Agriculture Chair Phyllis Shimabukuro-Geyser for making that, and we will send out the appropriate notice. Secondly, members, we received over the weekend numerous documents from ADC that we will be potentially considering. So I emailed that to you this morning, and they include a copy of timeline security measures, documents reflecting policy on land management, and emails regarding audit recommendations between staff from ADC and the auditor's office. Members, I received these documents as well as a voluminous amount of documents related to past litigation and current litigation ADC is undergoing. I'm going to request via a third subpoena ducis tecum that ADC produce these documents to us with appropriate bait stamp numbering. So the documents that you do have that were emailed to you this morning will also be submitted more formally to our committee with bait stamp numbers so that we can keep the discovery in a orderly manner. Members, any questions on the handling of this discovery? Any questions, members? All right, seeing none, then we're gonna move on. Finally, we're gonna, before we swear in Mr. Kondo, I just want to ensure a couple of procedural matters with Mr. Kondo. Mr. Kondo, are you there?
I am.
So as a reminder, this is a Chapter 21 hearing proceeding pursuant to our rules and statutes. And I just want to confirm that in attendance of this hearing, you did receive the subpoena that was served on you and your office to attend this hearing?
I have a subpoena. It was not served on me.
I believe it was served at your office. Is that correct?
It was served on my secretary. I was not in the office at the time.
Okay, do you accept service of that subpoena?
I didn't. It wasn't served on me, Chair. And I don't know what that means. I'm just telling you it wasn't served on me. I'm here to talk, and I'm not. I would have appeared without a subpoena, as I told you during many of our meetings. It wasn't necessary to subpoena me or to swear me in. You know, when I
understand, but I want to make sure that we preserve the proceedings. So I do want to ask you, did your office receive the subpoena to attend this hearing?
As I said earlier, the subpoena was served on my secretary.
Okay, and also was the rules and a copy of the resolution served to your secretary?
Yes.
Okay, and in those rules, did you review the rights that you have pursuant to our rules in terms of being a witness in our hearings?
I'm not sure what you're referring to, Chair.
Okay, let me ask you another question. Did you receive via email a letter from my office dated August 30th, 2021, and CC to all members in response to your letter dated August 24th, 2021?
I believe so.
Okay, and then do you acknowledge that in this letter, it outlines that as a witness or any witness at a hearing that you may have counsel present at these hearings with you?
I understood you to have explained that to me multiple times, and I guess my response continues to be, why do I need counsel? I thought this was just a follow-up on the audit recommendations. I don't understand why you're suggesting or offering that I be represented by legal counsel. I don't understand that. I don't understand the need for that.
Okay, I know you may not understand the need, but you are a subpoenaed witness to present. So I do want to affirm that you received this letter explaining that all subpoenaed witnesses before a Chapter 21 investigative committee is allowed to have counsel if they so wish. Okay, I see you nodding your head. So is that a yes, Mr. Kondo?
I didn't know there was a question there.
Okay, so again, my question is, do you understand that as a subpoenaed witness before a Chapter 21 investigative committee, that you are permitted and allowed, and you have been invited, if you so wish, to have counsel present with you?
Yes.
Okay. And that was pursuant to letter dated August 30th, 2021 to you that was sent both via hand delivery and email to your office.
It was pursuant also to the multiple times that you offered that or explained that during our informal meetings.
Okay.
I understood that.
Okay, thank you. So on that note, I'm going to swear you in, Auditor. So if you could raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you, Auditor. And one more question, just to also confirm for the record, you don't have a counsel present with you here at this hearing by your choice. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Auditor. Now, if we can proceed, I understand that you have a presentation that our members are eager to listen to regarding the process, finding, and recommendations set forth in your office's report number 21-01, Audit of the Agribusiness Development Corporation. I'll turn it over to you now. Thank you, Auditor.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Les Kondo, and I am the state auditor. I'm going to share my screen. My message is the host has disabled share screening.
We are working on it now. Should be good now, Auditor.
Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Great. All right. Well, thank you for having this hearing to talk about the audit of the Agribusiness Development Corporation, or ADC. This performance audit of ADC was requested by the legislature through a bill passed during the 2019 legislative session. As I said in testimony then, I had received many inquiries from legislators and members of the public to audit ADC during my tenure as state auditor. More requests to audit ADC than any other state agency. And we reported many important findings that are deserving of public discussion and corrective action by ADC. Now, as I did last week, I'm going to take the first few minutes to talk a little about our audit process. I think it will help you understand how we perform our work and why we're confident in the report's findings and the report's recommendations. Now, this is a brochure that we distribute to new legislators to introduce them to our office and our work. I added the website address in case you are interested in reading the brochure, or people that are watching, they're welcome to read the brochure as well. The audits that are subject of the committee's investigation are performance audits. They're not financial audits. Now, a financial audit offers an opinion on the presentation of the agency's financial statements, and whether they are presented fairly in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. A performance audit, on the other hand, examines the efficiency and effectiveness of government programs. We assess whether those programs are attaining the objectives and the results that the legislature intended. And we offer recommendations to the audited agency to address issues that we identify in the course of the audit. Our goal, as I said last time, is to make government better. And this is how we make government better. We provide independent, objective, and meaningful answers to questions about government performance. Our aim is to hold agencies accountable for their policy implementation, program management, and expenditure of public funds. Now there is structure to our audit work. In fact, a lot of structure. We are a Yellow Book office, which means our audits are conducted in accordance with government auditing standards promulgated by the Comptroller General of the United States. These professional standards, which are generally referred to as the Yellow Book, outline in detail the requirements for our audit reports, the professional qualifications of our auditors, and the structure of our quality control program. In short, following the Yellow Book guidelines ensure that we are performing high quality audit work with competence, integrity, objectivity, and independence. Now, our audit process can generally be broken down into 4 stages: planning, fieldwork, reporting, and follow-up. We start an audit by meeting with the agency's management to explain the audit process, to answer questions, to set expectations. We expect complete cooperation from the agency, meaning we expect the agency will provide us with documents we request, and agency staff will meet with us to answer questions we ask. The initial meeting with the agency's management, which we refer to as the entrance conference, kicks off the first phase of the audit, planning. Now, during planning, our goal is to gain a broad understanding of an agency's operations, how the agency is performing certain key functions. We ask for some high-level documents, things like org charts, policy statements, strategic plans, and annual reports. We will look at annual budget requests. We will often interview selected managers, oftentimes the department director and other staff, to deepen our understanding of the agency's work. One important point that we discussed during our initial meeting and mentioned throughout the audit process is that our work papers are confidential by law. The auditor shall not be required to disclose any work papers. Work papers include our notes, internal memorandum, and all of the audit evidence. Now, the legislature's intent that our work papers be confidential seems very clear. I don't read any ambiguity into that sentence. And there's good reason for protecting our work papers. We expect employees to be candid, to provide us with complete, truthful answers to questions, which they do. This confidentiality provision allows interviewees the freedom to talk without the fear that management or anyone else, including legislators, will hear what they told us, without the fear of retaliation for answering our questions candidly. We assure agency personnel who we interview that the information we gather in the course of the audit is not available to anyone outside of our office, including, maybe the better word is especially, things that they tell us during audit interviews. Now, once we have the general understanding about an agency's activities, we develop our audit objectives using a risk-based analysis. Audit objectives are the specific areas or processes that we intend to analyze. These objectives become the focus of our audit. Now, what I'm showing you is the matrix that we use to do our risk assessment. We first identify the audited agency's key activities. Now, those are the activities that are significant to carrying out the agency's purpose or mission. Then we carefully assess the risks associated with each of these key activities. Program risks for key activities are the things that could interfere with or impair the agency's performance of the key activity, and ultimately the agency's ability to achieve the key activity objective. In other words, these are events or conditions that could keep the key activity objective from being achieved. Now, using this investigative committee as the example, a key activity might be to obtain testimony from ADC about what it has done to implement the audit recommendations. A program risk might be that ADC doesn't participate in the committee's hearing. The magnitude of impact and the likelihood of occurrence are what determine whether the program risk is significant. Now, the magnitude of occurrence is the likely effect of the risk could have on the agency achieving its objectives. In other words, how significant is it if the activity is not properly or timely performed? Now, using the example of a program risk that ADC doesn't participate in the committee's hearing, the magnitude of impact is likely high. If ADC doesn't participate, the committee may not be able to obtain an understanding of what ADC has done to implement the recommendations. The likelihood of occurrence is the level of possibility that the risk will occur. In assessing the likelihood of occurrence, we assess the effectiveness of internal controls that we've identified during our planning work. Now, internal controls are processes that provide reasonable assurance that the key activity objective will be achieved. Effective internal controls will reduce and even sometimes eliminate the risk. We list the internal controls that we have identified during our planning work in that column between the magnitude of occurrence and the likelihood of occurrence. The likelihood of occurrence that ADC doesn't participate in the hearing is low. The committee has certain controls to reduce the risk that ADC doesn't participate. It's issued subpoenas compelling certain ADC personnel and board members to testify about ADC's efforts to implement the recommendations, and it has the power to enforce those subpoenas. The last column, the significance of program risk, is the relative importance of a matter in the context in which it is being considered. If the risk is insignificant, we won't consider the key activity as an audit objective. We don't want to audit a process that is insignificant because either it's not a big deal if it isn't working well, or it's unlikely that the program risk could affect the agency's performance of the key activity. Now, we use this chart to guide us in determining the significance of program risk. Generally, we consider developing an audit objective relating to the key activity if there is a significant risk. Now, that's the red area of the chart. In the example of ADC not testifying about its efforts to implement audit recommendations, while the magnitude of impact is high, the likelihood of occurrence is low. Now, using the chart, we would deem the program risk to be not significant. That means based upon our risk assessment, we would not consider auditing the committee's process to obtain testimony from ADC. In other words, we would not develop an audit objective relating to the committee's process to obtain testimony from ADC. Now, the audit objectives are what the audit is intended to accomplish. This detailed risk assessment and the objectives that flow from it form our audit roadmap, which not only points us in the direction of where we should go, but it also stakes out the four corners of where not to go. Now, having such guidance is critical because in auditing an agency's work, we cast a wide net and often pull in reams of information to sort through. The example of the committee's process to obtain ADC's testimony is very simplistic. In reality, the risk assessment is very detailed, very thorough, very time-consuming. It is not simple, but it helps to ensure that the audit is sufficiently narrow, that we can complete it in the required time frame with the resources we have, and that it will be meaningful. We are auditing activities that are key to the agency's ability to achieve its mission, and based upon our planning work, we think there is a significant risk in the agency's ability to perform those activities effectively and efficiently. Now, once we have developed the audit objectives, we start our field work. Now, we are looking for information specific to the objectives. We will take a deeper dive to understand about how the agency performs its activities relative to the objectives that we've developed. We will often re-interview management and staff who we interviewed during planning, this time focusing our questions on matters relating to the objectives. We'll ask for additional documents. We likely will test processes that the agency has developed to perform the key activity, looking at a selected group of transactions. For instance, when we audited the Office of Healthcare Assurance's annual relicensing of adult residential care homes, we reviewed a sample of 214 of 479 care home files. We generally don't look at every inspection, every transaction. However, there are times that we do test every transaction. With ADC, we initially requested files for 7 of ADC's 83 tenants that we had randomly selected to review. We wanted to assess whether the files contain the documents that are commonly used in property management, things like the tenant's application to lease the land, board approval to issue a tenant contract, the contract itself, insurance certificates, site inspection reports, things like that. The 7 files that we were provided, were missing many documents. None of the files were complete. So that prompted us to review the files for all 83 of ADC's tenants. And I want to comment, which also include all of ADC's tenants in Kekaha and Kalepa. On a side note, ADC could only assemble 71 of the 76 tenant files. So once a team feels that it has gathered sufficient and appropriate evidence to address the audit objectives, they prepare preliminary findings and recommendations. Now, we call that a PF&R. Now, we have a meeting and sometimes many meetings to discuss the PF&R. That discussion includes the project team, it includes the managers. We often have a lot of discussion about the PF&R. We test the support for those preliminary findings. We try to identify the root causes of the problems that we have discovered. And once the PF&R is finalized, once it's finished, we move to report drafting. The draft goes through many reviews, and every sentence is in the draft is referenced, meaning every factual sentence, every factual statement is supported by audit evidence, either documents or interviews, and conclusions are based on that evidence. Now, at the end of every sentence, each sentence, there is an electronic link to the supporting evidence. Now, when we feel the draft is ready, it goes through a quality control review. We refer to that process as an independent review. Another analyst who is not part of the project team is tasked with reviewing the draft and determining whether he or she agrees that the sentence is sufficiently and appropriately supported. And there is for each and every sentence in the report. The independent review process generally takes about a week, sometimes longer, and involves many back and forths between the independent reviewer and the team about the support for sentences that the independent reviewer may question. I cannot adequately describe to you how intense, how thorough that process is, but I can assure you that quality control is one of the most important steps of any audit, and our independent review process is no exception. Our audit findings must be supported by sufficient and appropriate audit evidence. Now, once we've finished our internal review process, we are confident that the report is factually accurate and supported. But as a final check, we provide the draft to the agency. We don't provide the draft to anyone outside of the agency. And from the beginning of the report, starting at the entrance conference, we explain this process to the agency, including the agency's opportunity to review the draft before it is published. We also explain that we will have an exit conference to discuss the audit findings, especially any disagreement or issue that the agency has with the draft report before we publish the report. We do consider all comments and revise the report as necessary. The agency can provide written comments about the report, which are included as part of the published report. We also include our response to those comments in the report. Now, once we have received an agency's written comments, we publish the report. We will publish the report by providing copies to the agency, the governor, the lieutenant governor, the BNF director, and every legislator. We also post a copy on our website and send email notification to those who have requested to receive those notifications. According to the Government Accountability Office, or GAO, saving tax dollars, improving programs and operations, and providing better service to the public represents Audit Work's bottom line. Recommendations are the vehicles by which those objectives are sought. However, it's the action on the recommendations, not the recommendations themselves, that help government work better at less cost. Effective follow-up is essential to realizing the full benefits of audit work. And that's what I hope the committee is inclined to do. This is the last step of our audit process, following up on the agency's implementation and audit recommendations. Initially, we ask agencies to self-report the status of their implementation to us each year, and we publish a consolidated report containing all of the agency's self-reported implementation status. Last week, there were some questions, maybe even some confusion about agency's self-reported implementation status. Now, this is our most recent report, consolidating the self-reported status of all audit recommendations made between 2015 and 2018. Here's the implementation status dashboard that reports the status by agency. And for each audit, there's a separate page in the report where we provide a little information about our audit findings. About 2 to 3 years after we issue the audit report, we perform what we call an active follow-up, where we assess the agency's implementation of the recommendations, and we issue a report specific to that agency's implementation. Now, in a follow-up, we're trying to understand what the agency has done to implement the recommendations. And for those recommendations that the agency represents have been implemented or partially implemented, we ask the agency to support that representation. In other words, to prove it. We want to review the new processes or procedures that the agency has implemented to address the findings. Our follow-up review is limited to assessing the implementation status. We don't explore new issues or revisit others that are unrelated to the recommendations. So I hope you have a better understanding of our audit process. The one thing that I can't put a slide on, in fact, it's the most significant thing I talked about it last Monday, and I feel like it's really important to talk about it again. That one thing is our analysts. Now, audit work it's not easy and it's not for everyone. Over the course of an audit, our analysts take a deep dive into an agency and its activities, and they become subject matter experts, all in a matter of a few months. And while they are collecting and digesting facts, figures, and transcripts, they must also sort through and analyze that material to determine what aligns with our objectives and contributes to an audit finding. Much of it doesn't. We have to be a quick study and a deep thinker. They must be able to ask tough questions. They need to develop professional judgment. We don't report only facts. We must be able to analyze those facts, to use our professional judgment to understand what those facts mean and to connect those factual dots based on certain criteria. That's the value we bring, to be able to provide an independent, unbiased, objective assessment, analysis of a state program that the legislature created and funds to ensure that the program is operating as the legislature intended, achieving its purpose and doing so effectively, efficiently, and ethically. We have a great group. I am very proud of our staff and very proud of our work, and I look forward to the opportunity to discuss our audit of ADC. Like I said at the beginning, we made some significant findings, things that ADC is just not doing well or maybe even at all. We did our job and we did it well, and we passed the baton to ADC to address those findings. The performance audit of ADC was directed by the legislature in 2019. The legislature also appropriated $100,000 for us to contract with an independent certified public accounting firm to audit ADC's financial statements, which we did. Through the audit process that I described, we developed audit objectives for the performance audit. We issued the performance audit report in January of this year. I included our website address on the slide. After last week's hearing, I saw at least one comment to a media story about the Special Land and Development Fund audit. The question was asking whether the report was available to the public. So if anyone is interested in reading the ADC audit report, it's posted on our website. If you type agribusiness in the search box at the top right corner of our homepage, the report should be the only result. All of our reports are accessible through our website. The objectives that we developed through this audit, through the risk assessment process, were to describe ADC's process for acquiring former plantation lands and facilitating their transition to other agricultural uses, to describe the efficiency or the effectiveness of ADC's land disposition and marketing strategies, including the proportion of former plantation lands in its asset portfolio that have been leased for other agricultural enterprises, to describe ADC's policies and guidelines for managing its lands and evaluate its enforcement of tenants' lease terms and conditions, and to make recommendations as appropriate. This is a summary of our findings. I'm going to discuss each of the findings in more detail in a second. I think it's important to note that we performed our audit work between June 2019 and March 2020. COVID-19 caused us to pause the audit for a few months. Since we finished our field work, we have not done anything more with respect to this audit. We have not done any follow-up work to assess action ADC may have taken to address the findings. Now, the legislature created ADC in 1994 amidst a series of sugar and pineapple plantation closures that signaled the end of an agricultural era dominated by industrial scale dual crop exports. Now, Chapter 163D is ADC's enabling statute. And in my view, it's unique amongst state laws. Very few statutory provisions that create state agencies or stand up state programs include such a clear statement of the legislature's intent as Chapter 163D. I apologize for this slide. I don't like slides that are full of words and are hard to read like this one. But I included it because Section 163D1 is so clearly expresses the legislature's intent, the legislature's purpose, in creating ADC that I thought it's important to see the legislature's language, your language. If you can't read the slide, again, I apologize for that, but I strongly encourage you to grab your copy of the Hawaii Revised Statutes, and if nothing more, read the section. The legislature recognized that the closure of the plantations presented, and I quote, an unprecedented opportunity for the conversion of agriculture into a dynamic growth industry, end quote, and projected that within the decade, the shuttered plantations would free up 75,000 acres of agricultural land and 50 million gallons of irrigation water daily. The legislature also understood that to transition those agricultural lands and associated infrastructure into new productive uses required, quote, an aggressive and dynamic leadership for the promotion and development of agricultural enterprises and centralized leadership to coordinate industry development, provide industry-wide services, provide marketing assistance, and facilitate investments and co-ventures in viable enterprises. Now, ADC was created to be that vehicle, to provide that aggressive and dynamic leadership. In fact, the legislature expressly defined ADC's role in carrying out the transition of the former plantation lands. The corporation shall coordinate and administer programs to assist agricultural enterprises to facilitate the transition of agricultural infrastructure from plantation operations into other agricultural enterprises, to carry on the marketing analysis, to direct agricultural industry evolution, and to provide the leadership for the development, financing, improvement, and enhancement of agricultural enterprises. So let's break that down. What does it say? The purpose for which the legislature created ADC. Now, ADC is to coordinate and administer programs to assist agricultural enterprises to transition the former plantation lands into new ag uses. ADC is to direct the agricultural evolution through market analysis. And ADC is to provide leadership to develop, finance, improve, and enhance agricultural enterprises. In a nutshell, ADC's purpose is to be the leader in converting those former plantation assets for use in commercial, diversified agriculture, to fill the economic void created by the departure of the sugar and pineapple industries. ADC is supposed to do that by facilitating and supporting that transition by these agricultural enterprises through data-driven analysis of markets for Hawaii-grown crops. ADC's purpose, the reason it was created, wasn't to buy the former plantation lands and to lease those lands to small farmers. Now, the term agricultural enterprises is used throughout the statute. It's throughout what I just read. It's a really important term. So what does that mean? The statute defines an enterprise. An enterprise is a Hawaii business. And again, I'm going to quote the statute: engaged in agricultural crop development, development of new value-added products, enhancement of existing agricultural commodities, and the application of existing agricultural appurtenant facilities to productive uses, provided that the majority of whatever the corporation produces shall be produced for export. End quote. In English, an enterprise is an ag business, growing or processing crops, or a Hawaii organization that develops ag processing or other types of facilities, provided that the majority of whatever the corporation produces shall be produced for export. ADC's purpose is to facilitate the development of organizations that export crops, not to develop small farms. And that makes sense. ADC was created to help fill the economic void caused by the closure of the sugar and pineapple plantations, which in their heyday created one of the three legs of the state's economy, along with tourism and the military. While the statute does confer on ADC the power to purchase land and to sell or lease that land, and the law was amended in 2008 to specifically authorize ADC to acquire agricultural lands as directed by the legislature, ADC's primary purpose, to facilitate the transition from dual crop plantations to diversified agriculture, has remained consistent and unchanged since the corporation was created in 1994. To provide the aggressive and dynamic leadership envisioned by the legislature, ADC was created as a public body corporate and given some extraordinary powers and exemptions from state laws. In fact, because of these superpowers and unique exemptions, the Legislative Reference Bureau called ADC a public agency on steroids. The fact that ADC is created as a public body corporate is a clear signal that the legislature intended ADC to operate like a private business. ADC was not intended to be just like any other state agency, and it clearly was not intended to mimic the work being done by DOA. Other state agencies that are created as public body corporate, agencies that are not intended to operate or are intended to operate like private businesses, include the Aloha Tower Development Corporation, which was created to revitalize or redevelop Honolulu's waterfront, the Hawaii Technology Development Corporation, which focuses on developing the state's technology sector, and the Hawaii Health Systems Corporation, which provides healthcare services to address the healthcare needs of Hawaii residents. HHSC operates the Leahi Hospital, Hilo Medical Center, Ka'u Hospital, Kona Community Hospital, among other facilities across the state. Now, to operate like a private business, the legislature conferred on ADC powers that are relatively unique in state government, that afford the corporation unrivaled flexibility to bring former plantation lands back into production in a timely manner. Now, these superpowers include allowing ADC to incorporate itself as a nonprofit corporation, to create subsidiary corporations, to transfer funds and property or any project to those subsidiaries. ADC can directly invest or co-venture with a professional investor. What that means is ADC can invest directly in an enterprise. Remember, that term's defined to mean a non-government Hawaii business, to provide the enterprise with seed capital and can guarantee the enterprise's securities, their stocks, their promissory notes, to a private investor. ADC can, by itself or in partnership, acquire, construct, reconstruct, improve, or repair any infrastructure or accessory facility. And with the approval of the governor, ADC can issue revenue bonds. ADC is also empowered to help agricultural enterprises by conducting market analysis for them and developing market and promotional strategies to strengthen the positions of those enterprises. So what did we find? What has ADC done to facilitate the development of these agricultural enterprises that the legislature envisioned to replace the economic loss of sugar and pine? The short answer is very little. We found that more than 25 years since its creation, it has done little to fill that economic void. So what's ADC done during that time? In 1999, 5 years after it was established, ADC acquired the Waihole Ditch, 26-mile-long Waihole water system that Oahu Sugar Company had used to deliver water from Windward, Oahu to irrigate its 5,600 acres of sugarcane in central Oahu. The Waihole water system was ADC's first asset. In 2003, ADC became a land manager. Almost 13,000 acres in Keikaha that were under DLNR Land Division's management were transferred to ADC, tenants and all. In 2010, another approximately 6,000 acres in Kalepa were transferred from the Land Division to ADC. For both properties, ADC has entered into agreements with farmers cooperatives, the Keikaha Agricultural Association and the Kalepa Coalition, to operate and manage the common infrastructure, things like the roads, the irrigation, and related improvements. In 2012, nearly 20 years after it was created, ADC completed its first land acquisition, 1,227 acres of Galbraith land stretching from Wahiawa to the boundary of Wailua. Over the next 3 years, ADC purchased 3 properties, 2 in Whitmore and 1 in Wahiawa, totaling more than 280 acres. From 2016 to 2019, ADC purchased another 9 properties in the Whitmore Village and Wahiawa areas, totaling more than 2,000 acres. However, ADC struggled to lease its lands. As of 2019, ADC has licensed. ADC doesn't issue leases. It enters into lease agreements. I'm sorry, it doesn't issue leases. It enters into license agreements. ADC has licensed 534 of Galbraith Land's 1,227 acres. More than 8 years after acquiring those lands, more than half of those lands remain without farmers, unoccupied. Collectively, ADC's properties have a 75% vacancy rate, with 7 of its 12 other Oahu properties completely vacant. More importantly, we found that ADC has not done much, anything really, to facilitate the development of large-scale agricultural enterprises. Those private entities, as well as ones in which ADC is involved. Entities to export diversified agricultural products on a scale even remotely close to sugar and pine. We did not find any evidence that ADC is that aggressive and dynamic leader, that catalyst that the legislature intended. After nearly 30 years after its creation, we found an organization that's struggling to manage its 4,257 acres of land, all in central Oahu and the Wahole water system. Now, why does it matter? Why should we care whether ADC is achieving the purpose for which it was created? Well, Hawaii has yet to fill the economic void that was caused by the shuttering of the pineapple and sugar plantations that started with the termination of pineapple production on Lanai and the closure of Dole Foods' Iwalei Cannery in 1992. In its foresight, the 1994 legislature recognized the need to conserve and convert the arable lands and associated production infrastructure in a timely manner. That hasn't happened. And almost 30 years later, much of that opportunity to transition agriculture into a dynamic growth industry, which the legislature called an unprecedented opportunity, may have been lost. Some of those former plantation lands are now Kapolei. Some of them are Ho'opili and Koa Ridge. The COVID-19 pandemic highlighted the importance of agriculture. I know there's been a lot of stories about the need to diversify our economy, the need to have a diverse, well-balanced economy. Without the third leg of our economy, without that dynamic agricultural industry, the state's economy experienced a tremendous hit as COVID-19 caused the governor to restrict travel to Hawaii, virtually shuttering the tourism industry and severely disrupting the state's economy. Large-scale agricultural enterprises whose crops are primarily exported would likely have lessened the economic blow while providing the state with greater food self-sustainability. The high cost the states paid for ADC's past inactions and its continued lack of direction and focus is immeasurable, and the missed opportunities are really unknown. This is a Hawaii Business magazine from July of this year. The feature article is about how the state is trying to turn the local film industry into that missing leg of our economic stool. Now, I thought the statement by Chris Lee, who's the founder and director of the Academy for Creative Media, is quite telling. After sugar and pineapple collapsed, Hawaii's only major export has been our children. Our only major export has been our children. Now, there are other effects, consequences of ADC's misunderstanding of its purpose. So instead of facilitating, meaning working with private organizations to develop and diversify agriculture on the former plantation lands, ADC has been buying land, and as a consequence, has become a land manager. That, however, is something that ADC readily concedes is not its forte. Throughout the audit, ADC officials told us that they're developers, they're not land managers. And because ADC has struggled to get farmers on its land, as I mentioned, as of December 2019, the vast majority of ADC's Oahu lands are vacant. ADC has struggled to manage its vacant lands, to secure the lands, and to prevent illegal activities on those lands. We included a number of instances of activities that were reported by the local media in the report. ADC acquired its Galbraith lands in 2012, knowing that there were criminal activities on the property. Yet it didn't take measures to secure the lands until February 2020, after the media reported a massive chop shop with tents, generators, and operating 24/7, and then a fatal shooting on the property. A month later, a woman was fatally shot on the parcel, which according to the Board of Agricultural chair, was the third fatal shooting in the area. Media subsequently reported a sweep of the property by law enforcement, which resulted in multiple arrests and a dozen trespassing warnings. The sweep uncovered multiple criminal activities, according to the project manager, including stolen vehicles, abandoned cars, and illegal dumping. The project manager reported that the cost to hire a security company to patrol the ADC properties, which in central Oahu total about 4,300 acres, for 6 months was about $600,000. In addition to the security costs, the murders, the chop shop, the abandoned cars, and the dumping, any other illegal activity on ADC lands, those activities may create liability to the state and potentially substantial liability. So how did the problems occur? What's happening? What's causing them? The fundamental issue is that after almost 30 years since it was created, ADC still does not understand its overarching purpose. ADC still does not understand what the legislature intended it to be. The legislature created an organization, one that the legislature envisioned would provide aggressive and dynamic leadership to promote and develop agricultural enterprises, to provide centralized leadership to coordinate industry development, provide industry-wide services, provide marketing assistance, and facilitate investments and co-ventures with private investors. In short, the legislature envisioned an economic development organization that would provide the necessary support to identify and develop new markets for Hawaii's agricultural industry. Instead, ADC sees itself as an ag developer, but even that does not describe what ADC has done since its inception. For the first decade, it was primarily a water system manager. Since 2012, ADC has become, at least as ADC characterizes itself, a developer and a wahiawa landlord, intent to acquire a few thousand acres of land and license those lands to small farmers. ADC needs to be a developer. It does need to be a developer, but not a developer of ag lands. Rather, ADC needs to be a developer of markets. So those agricultural enterprises will take root in the state and their export products will build a new dynamic agricultural economy. This highlights this disconnect between its intended purpose and what ADC believes its purpose to be. This is from ADC's presentation to the House Committee in February about the audit. ADC declares its mission to be acquire and manage selected agricultural lands, water systems, and ag-related infrastructure. Nowhere in the mission statement is there even a reference to its primary purpose, a purpose that has remained consistent and unchanged since it was created in 1994 to facilitate the development of a new dynamic agricultural industry to replace the economic void created by the loss of pineapple and sugar, to be that economic development organization. This is ADC's purpose stated by the legislature. Like I said earlier, to coordinate and administer programs to assist agricultural enterprises, those Hawaii organizations that are exporting more than half of their crops, to transition the former plantation infrastructure to provide leadership for the development, financing, improvement, or enhancement of those agricultural enterprises. This statement of the legislature's purpose is not the same as what ADC believes its mission to be. In addition, or maybe because ADC doesn't understand its purpose, ADC has not prepared a Hawaii Agribusiness Plan. Now, that plan is required by Chapter 163D. The Agribusiness Plan is such an important, necessary tool if ADC is going to do anything more than manage a collection of small farmers, something that DOA already does, and does so without ADC's superpowers. An agribusiness plan would define and establish goals, objectives, policies, and priorities for ADC's agribusiness development strategy. In addition to developing an inventory of lands and infrastructure that are or will become available or abandoned due to the downsizing of the sugar and pineapple industries, the statute requires that the agribusiness plan include an analysis of the potential for increasing local production of products that the state currently imports to increase Hawaii's agricultural self-sufficiency. The plan would identify alternative financial programs to promote the development of diversified agriculture. feasibility studies for the promotion, marketing, and distribution of Hawaii agricultural products in local, national, and international markets. It would include strategies to ensure adequate air and surface transportation for those products, and proposals to improve the gathering of data about market demands and trends that can be used to plan future harvests and production. And ADC is required to update the agribusiness plan from time to time. However, ADC doesn't recognize the need or the importance of such a plan or any type of strategic plan. The executive director told us he thinks a plan is unnecessary. He said that he has it all in his head. Without a plan, one that establishes its goals, objectives, policies, and priorities, ADC will continue to just be a mini DOA, managing a group of small farmers and doing little to facilitate the development of large-scale ag to be that third leg of our economy. I want to make a couple more points or comments about the plan, the importance of the plan. ADC has told us that it is the private landowner's interests that drives its land acquisitions. When landowners want to sell, ADC must act. That perspective is misguided. ADC's interests, its plans, that's what should drive its work, including its land acquisitions. More importantly, without an agribusiness plan, an agribusiness development strategy, or any other type of strategic plan, it is unclear how or even when the lands ADC has acquired fit into the state's goal of developing agricultural exports or even agricultural self-sufficiency. As I mentioned, the majority of lands ADC has acquired are still without farmers. They're vacant. ADC also says that it's DOA's responsibility to do the market research, to collect data on market demands and trends to help farmers plan future harvests and production, not ADC's. We didn't audit DOA, but the statute puts the responsibility in ADC's court. Given ADC's purpose to lead the transformation, the type of research DOA currently is doing may be different from the data ADC needs to fulfill its statutory purpose. And we're not the only organization that believes ADC's approach in acquiring lands is an ineffective approach to developing an agricultural base. Right after we issued our report, UHERO released a report entitled Reviving Agriculture to Diversify Hawaii's Economy. And a large part of UHERO's report focused on ADC. One of the comments by the auditors of the report repeats what we found. ADC's approach in buying lands is not effective. We believe that Hawaii's strategies to revive agriculture are flawed and extremely costly because they focus on bringing more agricultural land under state ownership. When the state purchases land from plantation owners, the risks associated with land ownership shift from landowners of former plantation lands to the state government and Hawaii taxpayers. Now, highlighting the importance of the research that ADC is statutorily required to perform but is not doing, UHERO concluded, unless owners of fallow agricultural land, entrepreneurial farmers, and state researchers identify a set of new field crops that could take the place of sugar and pineapple, say hemp, biofuels, or a new forest product, it seems highly unlikely that agriculture can be a major source of economic growth over the next decade. It seems highly unlikely. One more. Promoting Hawaii agricultural products is long overdue. And from my presentation, I hope it's clear, we agree. The next two findings are meaningful, they're important findings. But our first finding that ADC has done little to achieve its purpose after nearly 30 years is the most significant of our findings. Our second finding relates to ADC's management of its lands. We first asked for ADC's documents that we believed are essential to the operations of an organization that owns and manages lands, like land management policies and procedures, land acquisition guidelines, land inventories, and tenant lists. ADC told us that the requested documents either did not exist or would have to be assembled. As I mentioned earlier, we also asked for tenant files to assess ADC's ADC's land or tenant management. We wanted to determine whether the types of documents that we expected to be in tenant files were in fact in those files. Documents such as applications to lease ADC lands, staff submittals to the board ranking the applications, board approvals, including the approved terms of the licenses, the license agreements themselves, certificates of insurance, inspection reports, and general correspondence. We initially asked to review 7 of ADC's 83 tenant files. We were provided with what appeared to be brand new manila file folders, each containing only a handful of documents. None were complete. That caused us to request the remaining 76 tenant folders. However, ADC staff was only able to assemble 71 of the 76 tenant folders. And those files were haphazardly thrown together with documents disorganized, exhibits unstapled to documents, making it difficult to understand the order of pages and exhibits. Many were missing copies of the license agreement, revocable permit, or any other right of entry document that purportedly was issued to the tenant. Many were missing the board action on tenant contracts. And although staff represented that the board had approved the contracts, board minutes did not reflect the board's action. More than half contained no evidence that the tenant had complied with insurance requirements. In one file, the tenant's certificate of insurance had been revoked due to non-payment of the premium, but there was nothing to indicate what, if any, action ADC took to enforce compliance with the contract's insurance requirements. Now, why does it matter? I don't think I need to talk too much about why it's important for any state agency, and more so one that is licensing or leasing state lands, receiving revenues from those lands, to maintain accurate records, to have a robust record-keeping system. You can't run an operation, let alone one that's supposed to operate like a private business, without records. We reported other concerns that are caused by ADC's lack of records and its lack of policies and procedures. One of the concerns is the handshake type agreements it has made with its anchor tenant. That tenant has occupied and farmed ADC-owned lands for years without a formal written agreement. We saw evidence of the tenant's farming activities during a site visit in October 2019, which was roughly 2 weeks before ADC finally executed a license agreement with terms retroactive to 2016. The tenant also provided services, building reservoirs on ADC lands and creating roadways through ADC's Galbraith lands using rubble that DOT had removed during its work on the Pully Highway tunnels. Now, that work was done in exchange for undetermined and undefined rent credits. ADC did not document, it did not monitor, it did not track the work, the labor, the materials provided by the tenant. The executive director acknowledged that ADC is simply taking the tenant's word on the work performed, the cost incurred, and the materials used. Now, why is it happening? What's the cause? Now, we had difficulty pinpointing exactly why ADC struggles with managing the lands it has acquired since 2012, in part because its record-keeping and filing system were in such disarray. To say the obvious, ADC needs a filing system. We recognize that ADC has limited staff and it lost its secretary during the audit. However, many of the documents we requested were piled under the secretary's desk. Many were stacked randomly on cabinet shelves, as ADC said, wherever there was an empty space. While some documents were in file cabinets, they weren't organized by tenant or subject matter. As a result, obtaining documents during the audit was a constant struggle, not because ADC's staff was uncooperative. Staff had to hastily assemble tenant files after we requested them, pulling information from many different places. But as I mentioned, the files they provided were disorganized and often were missing important documents like board approvals, license agreements, and proof of insurance. ADC could not even provide us with baseline metrics of its land holdings and its management resources because they do not collect, track, and document such data. We had to create our own inventory of ADC lands and licenses issued for portions of larger parcels during our audit. Moreover, ADC doesn't understand the need for or the importance of documented policies and procedures. As the executive director told us, documented guidance would be good to have, but he doesn't want to get stuck with something in writing. As a state agency, ADC must be accountable for its use of public funds, and documented procedures are necessary to ensure that work is being performed as it should be, as management intended. A state agency can't be run by what's in someone's head. The documented policies and procedures should encompass all of ADC's significant activities, from its management of its lands to its board's actions. The policies and procedures should, among other things, direct specific documents that must be maintained in tenant files, the processes to ensure that tenants do not occupy state land prematurely without an executed license agreement or some other right to enter the property, to ensure that tenants provide the required documentation like certificates of insurance. However, without such policies and procedures, we could not determine which, if any, part of a process may have failed. Our third finding is related to the first two findings. Now, ADC's board provides minimal guidance and oversight to the corporation. The board is comprised of 11 members, 8 of whom are appointed by the governor, and 3 of whom are ex officio members. The ex officio members are the director of the Department of Business, Economic Development and Tourism, the chair of the Board of Agriculture, and the chair of the Board of Land and Natural Resources, or their designees. We found that the ADC Board of Directors is not acting as a board should. As with any program headed by a board of directors, the board is responsible for policymaking, for determining the big picture priorities of the agency, and oversight to ensure that the agency is achieving its mission. In contrast, the day-to-day operations and administrative duties are the responsibility of staff, specifically in the case of ADC, the executive director. Yet we found that some directors are blurring the line between corporate governance and day-to-day operations, performing some of the day-to-day stuff, staff-level type activities. They're recruiting farmer tenants, reviewing applications for lease agreements, and actually visiting farms to see if farmers know what they're doing. Without a more cohesive board, the board largely has delegated its responsibilities to the executive director. The executive director said that the board rarely chimes in during land acquisition process. During the land acquisition process, and the board approval to proceed with a purchase is more of a formality. And our review of the board minutes confirmed this lack of engagement by board members. There is little, if any, discussion about land acquisitions. The vice chair didn't think the board should micromanage the organization. He told us the board is ultimately responsible for the direction of the corporation and should be approving ADC's priorities, such as acquisitions, leasing, and marketing, which he conceded the board is currently not doing. We found other instances of the lack of board involvement or oversight. The board chair was aware that the executive director had not prepared an agribusiness plan, which, as we explained earlier, is required by statute, extremely important. But she didn't fault the executive director for not preparing the plan. She said it's a big job, it's not a priority, and the office is short-staffed. The vice chair, however, thought the plan not only had been completed, but it had been updated. He agreed the board needs to hold the executive director accountable for his performance, including ADC's compliance with statutory requirements. But he said the board's only aware of the matters that the executive director or the deputy attorney general choose to bring before them. Now, why does it matter? The short answer is because ADC is not doing what it was created to do, to be that leader in the agricultural transformation. As we discussed with respect to the first finding, the legislature intended ADC to facilitate the development of a new dynamic agricultural economy by working with and even investing in agricultural enterprises, large organizations that would fill the economic void, and to identify potential markets for Hawaii products through data-driven market research. That, however, is not today's ADC. And frankly, it's never been ADC. If ADC is to be that leader, the leader envisioned by the legislature in 1994 when the corporation was created, if ADC is going to help the state replace sugar and pineapple, the board must lead that charge. It must direct ADC to be that centralized leader, to coordinate industry development of agricultural enterprises, to provide industry-wide services to create the dynamic growth industry, to provide marketing assistance, and to facilitate investments and co-ventures in those organizations that will help to fill that economic void. Because the board does not hold the executive director accountable, but instead approves whatever he chooses to bring before the board's allowing the executive director to make those policy decisions and to dictate the corporation's activity, even where those decisions and activities may be inconsistent with state law. Now, why is it happening? Now, this is ADC's org chart. And as you'd expect with any organization having a board of directors, the board is the head of ADC. And as the head, the top of the organization, the board of directors are responsible for the organization, its activities, its fulfillment of the legislative intent, ensuring that the corporation operates efficiently and effectively. That organizational structure, however, does not exist at ADC. Rather than taking an active role in developing an agribusiness policies, establishing short and long-term strategic plans, and even charting the corporation's direction, the chair and vice chair believe that the board's responsibility is to address whatever business is brought before it by the executive director. And as a result of that misguided perspective, ADC has yet to provide the necessary leadership to facilitate the transition of the agricultural lands and infrastructure from plantation operations into other agricultural enterprises. And just as importantly, the board does not understand the purpose for which the organization was established. I'm not going to repeat what I said again and again about the legislature's intended purpose of ADC, but suffice to say, ADC was envisioned to be an economic development organization, not a land manager. And this isn't the only time that it has been reported that board members do not know the corporation's mission. In 1997, just 3 years after ADC was created, the Legislative Reference Bureau, LRB, issued a report. Planning is not a four-letter word, a formative evaluation of the Agribusiness Development Corporation. In that report, LRB said that disagreement between then board members as to ADC's mission, as well as their understanding of the corporate objectives, that's what they reported. LRB reported one of ADC's staff to say that the single most important reason for ADC's lack of progress was the lack of board consensus. In 2006, ADC issued another report, Agribusiness Development Corporation Revisited. In that report, LRB found ADC's activities were considerably more limited than what the legislature had originally envisioned for the corporation. At that time, ADC was primarily an irrigation system manager. Today, ADC has added landowner and manager to those activities. But as we have reported, that too is considerably more limited than what the legislature intended. Now, we include recommendations in all of our reports, and this report's no different. I'm not going to read through the recommendations, but I think it's very important to understand what the recommendations represent. The recommendations are our suggestions. There are recommendations as to how the department can address what we believe are the causes of the problems that we identified. There are suggestions. They are not the only way to address the audit findings. That is why I suggest it's very important for an auditee, and really the committee as well, to focus on the audit findings. Now, I've heard both the executive director and the ADC board repeatedly state they just need to review the recommendations. That perspective is misplaced. It's misdirected. The findings are what we determined are not going well based on competent, sufficient evidence. ADC needs to address the findings, whether it's how we recommended or through some other way. If ADC has a different approach to addressing those findings, that's fine. Our goal is to help ADC understand what it was created to do and achieve its legislative directed purpose. I mentioned at the beginning in describing our audit process that the department can provide written comments that we include in the report. ADC's comments are at page 46 of the report. We provided our response to ADC's comments at page 41 of the report. I don't know whether ADC has started to address the findings. I do know that we addressed each of ADC's comments to the report. We did not find any of ADC's comments to be compelling. Now, you may want to read ADC's comments in our response to understand why we did not agree with whatever ADC raised. We did our job and we did it well. We did. We reported findings that are based on sufficient and competent audit evidence. But like I said Monday, we have no further powers or responsibilities. What I mean is that compelling ADC to address the audit findings, to fix things, it's beyond our authority. With the issuance of the report, we passed the baton to ADC to address the audit findings, to make its processes better, and to become more transparent and accountable. And that baton is also passed to the legislature. The legislature has the power, the authority to compel action by the department, which it is purportedly the purpose of this committee's investigation into the implementation of the recommendations. Now, before I end my statement, I think it's necessary to address this committee's investigation. It's become readily apparent, very clear, at least some of the members of the committee are using the pretense of following up on the audits of ADC and the Special Land and Development Fund to continue an attack against me and my office that manifested itself in the form of the so-called auditor working group that the speaker formed and a number of the House bills introduced last session that sought to, among other things, slash our budget by 50%. I was very naive to have thought that we were done with that game of politics and that we could just return to doing our job. This is the House resolution that the chair referenced that established this investigative committee to follow up on the audits of the Special Land and Development Fund and ADC. That's the purpose of this committee. That is the subject matter and the scope of the committee's authority. To follow up on the audits of SLDF and ADC, to examine the recommendations in the audits, and for purposes of improving the operations and management of those state agencies. It seems ironic that the committee, or at least some of the members, last week seemed to be primarily questioning our interpretation of Act 209, specifically the scope of the audit that the legislature intended us to perform with respect to DLNR's Special Land and Development Fund. Trying so obviously to get DLNR officials to support the ridiculous narrative that we had some hidden motive to audit the land division's management of state lands. Yet here, the purpose and scope of the committee's investigation, as stated in the House resolution, clearly does not include an investigation of my office or our work. Ironic to say the least. One of the fundamental requirements of due process or simple fairness is notice. I certainly have not received any notice that I or my office are the target of this committee's work. If the committee has expanded the investigation or the purpose, nobody's told me. There is no information on the committee's website about an expanded purpose, none. The committee needs to be transparent, to be honest about what the committee is doing. Tell me, tell my staff, tell your colleagues, tell the public, what are you investigating and why? It's only fair, it's only professional. The sneaky, underhanded approach is just not appropriate. Using the chair's word, it's curious, and I assume others find it curious too. I hope the committee will drop the pretense. Let's put our cards on the table. Let's have an honest discussion about whatever you want to discuss, whatever your concerns may be. I participated in the committee's hearing last Monday about the Special Land and Development Fund audit. I'm here today to do what the committee has asked, to provide the committee with an overview of our process and to talk about the audit of ADC. I repeat what I said Monday. We have nothing to hide. We did our job and we did it well. And thank you for your time.
If you could unshare your screen, Auditor. All right, members, that concludes the presentation by the auditor. It's now 10:20. I'm going to give us 5 minutes to recess in order to just take a break, and then we will assume our questions. So if we can come back at 10:25. We are in recess. Convening the investigative committee on Monday, September 20th for House Investigative Committee to investigate investigative compliance with audit numbers 19-12 and 21-01. To members of the public and our committee members who are present via video, Zoom, and in person, we are now going to be moving to the questioning phase of our agenda. However, before we begin that, I would like to respond to Mr. Kondo's last comments in his presentation about the scope of this committee's work. I sense that we're going to agree to disagree, Auditor Kondo, about what the scope of this committee's work is. As you noted in your citation to the resolution, our committee's purpose is broad and includes any other matters related to this series of audits. And in my opening statement of last week, I did state that our purpose was to follow up on the audits as noted and to examine the recommendations made in those audits for purposes of improving the operation and management of state agencies, their funds, and any other matters of importance that may be supported by the evidence submitted to the committee. As I stated then, quote, the subject matter of both these audits are critical to the management of state lands, and that's why we were examining in depth both the process, findings, and recommendations of this audit. I also stated in my opening statement that the investigative committee will be seeking full transparency from all individuals and agencies involved in audit numbers 19-12 and 21-01 as it examines various issues either included or omitted by the audits, including those issues related to policy, mismanagement, malfeasance, or fraud. So those members and to the public is the scope of this committee grounded in the resolution that was passed by the State House of Representatives. On that comment, I'm going to start and open up questions, first with Chair Mark Hashem of the House Committee on Agriculture. Go ahead, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Auditor. Thank you for the presentation. I would first like to ask, did your office do this audit or was it contracted out?
What I described, the performance audit, we did it.
Okay. Who was the analyst?
Who are people of our team?
Yes,
Well,
that
what is
interviewed.
What's the relevance of that? This is an audit that's issued by my office under my signature.
So you did not interview ADC directly?
I participated in some of the meetings, some of the conferences, and may have sat in on some of the interviews. I think I sat in on some of the board members as well.
You know who was the analyst?
Can I ask the relevance?
Okay, for one, there's information. You have statements in the audit that I don't feel is correct. For example, on page 19, it says ADC does not have document policies and procedures. I know ADC has documented policies. I'm looking at their approved June 24, 2009 meeting by the board, and it states land management policies and guidelines by ADC. But in your audit, you say ADC told you they don't have guidelines and procedures. I know they have procedures. So why would this statement be in here when they have procedures?
As I explained in discussing our process, what we do is we ask for documents, we interview staff and board members in this case, and we ask questions. If we don't get documents or we don't get responses, then obviously we don't know what we don't know. So we do.
Wait, before you continue, this is a public document.
Oh, I don't think any of the documents that we got from ADC were somehow not public documents.
So that's why I would like to ask the analyst, because obviously you're not answering the question.
I am. I'm trying to explain the process. If we're not given the documents that we request, or we're not told about documents during interviews, then we would have no way of knowing that the document exists. I think the bigger question or the bigger response to your question is, as I explained, is we go through a quality control review. And
that's not the question. I talked to ADC and they said, yes, we told the auditor that the auditor knows that we have, what is this? Policies and guidelines.
Well, like I said, we go through a quality review process. So that statement had support. So the independent reviewer would have seen something, probably an interview, that would have supported that sentence.
So who is the independent reviewer then?
Somebody that is not part of the audit team.
Who is the independent reviewer?
Are you looking for the person's name?
Well, so we can ask why are there statements within the audit that are not correct?
Yeah, I'm going to tell you that we stand behind the audit. In other words,
Okay, so I'll move on.
Chair. Are you refusing to answer the question, Mr. Kondo, about who is the independent reviewer?
I don't know off the top of my head who was the independent reviewer.
Can you please provide the committee with the name of the independent reviewer? And to follow up with Chair Hashim's request, he asked who the analysts were, but I think the more appropriate question are who are the staff who performed the field work? Can we have the names of the staff who performed the field work?
I will think about it. And what this is doing is this clearly is just trying to find toeholds to try to create something out of nothing. I've explained.
Wait. No,
this is not a, this is.
let me go on then.
Can I
Stop,
finish
I'm
my
going to allow
response?
Chair Hashim.
Can
I'm
I
going to
finish my
allow Chair
response?
Hashim, excuse me. Auditor Kondo, I'm going to let Chair Hashim ask this next question, and then we're going to move on to Minority Leader Okimoto. Chair Hashim, please
Okay.
stop this line of questioning because we have heard from the auditor that he does not know who the independent reviewer is at this time.
Okay.
He will provide us the name, and he will think about whether he will provide the names of the field work analysts.
Okay,
That's your next question.
so on page 23, it says regarding vacant properties home to criminal activity, it says ADC did not take measures to secure the area until February 2020. Within the I have a timeline and document of what ADC did to secure the area, what they tried to do to secure the area. This goes back to Marcus Ashiro days, back to 2016, 2015. Why is that? Can you please explain that statement?
I think I've been trying to explain it to your first question, and now I'll explain it here, is I explained at the beginning, we have a process which we follow, okay? And that process provides us great confidence that what is in the report is supported, okay? And I explained to you how we gather audit evidence to support whatever we say in the report. We ask for documents, we have interviews, we do other type of work. So we're confident that whatever we report is supported.
That's a difficult statement to make because they did sweeps of certain areas of ADC, which proves that actions were taken before February 2020. I don't understand why you have this statement in here when even ADC told me, I should say, that they relayed this message that they tried to secure the area, but yet you have this statement of February 2020. So I don't understand where the miscommunication was.
I think the absurdity of what you're describing is the committee is doing a lot of informal work, talking to people, not swearing anyone in, yet you have me and others that appear before the committee offer sworn testimony. I don't know who said what. I don't know why they said what. I don't even know if it's the truth. And yet you're referencing these comments that you received from someone at ADC or purportedly received. I think that whole process is just ridiculous. But let me address what you're talking about. Are you concerned that ADC is securing their property, that they're doing a great job? Well, as I said during my presentation, as we reported in the audit report, they're doing a terrible job, or at least they were, in securing that property. We talked about reports that the media had about the chop shop, about murders, about other criminal activity on the property. The fact that ADC had to hire a security company, $600,000 for 6 months, that shows that they really were not adequately securing their property. So, I'm not sure what you're referring to, but like I keep saying, we're confident that the support that we have, that we gather during the audit, it supports the statements in the report.
Okay, I'll tell you what I'm referring to. What my concern is, when the audit comes out with false statements like this, it gives the public, you give the public a bad sense of what the state is doing, because you're painting a picture that is obviously not correct. I don't know where the miscommunication came from, but when the audit comes out like this, and if this is not an actual factual statement and it's incorrect, you're conveying to the public a false sense of, you're painting a very bad picture of state government, and you're making ADC and you're making the rest of the state have a difficult time doing their job, because the media will pick up on statements like this. That's my concern.
I think
unwarranted statements like this, that is my concern.
I think you need to look at the forest. And I think you need to ask, or the question that I ask you, are you saying that ADC, that there was no chop shop? There were no abandoned vehicles? There was no trash? There were no...
Okay, our legislators are asking the questions, and the question asked and answered. And if you could restrain your comments for the closing remarks, which I will allow you to have time to do. We're going to move on to the next set of questions.
No questions, I'm fine.
Okay, and members, we're going to circle back. Next set of questions are from Minority Leader Della Okimoto. Minority Leader, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I don't, at this moment, I don't have any questions for Auditor Kondo. Thank you. Okay,
Chair Kobayashi, you have the next question.
Thank you, Chair. So, Mr. Kondo, I touched on this a little bit on my questioning with regard to the special land development funds. But in a prior life, I was a Big 8 auditor back in the day, and things may have changed a little bit, and I have kind of a difficult time getting around some of the issues related to what we refer to as referencing, which is the process by which an independent person not involved in the audit ensures that every statement in that audit report is properly referenced. Now, I think it's been referred to by the committee as an independent investigator or something of that nature, but really, it's just somebody, it's an audit, one of your auditors that did not work on the audit, that the practice should be to ensure that everything in that report is properly supported. Is that still the case with what you call independent?
We call it an independent review. Representative. Yes. Yes, that is the case. And like I mentioned, that process could take a week or longer to go through the report to resolve the concerns that the independent reviewer has about the support for the statements in the report. It's not an easy, quick process. It is a very intense, thorough process.
Yeah, I hated doing that. I mean, it's a lot of work, and there's a lot of responsibility and title that comes along with it. So, and it always been a fairly rote process that there's really not a lot of because you're not involved with the audit issues. So all you're looking at, nothing about the audit, and that's for a reason, obviously, that you are making sure that every single thing in there is supported, just according to generally accepted auditing standards, which I think back in my day and now haven't changed a bit. So when you go through that process, it's a long process. Is there any new standard that I'm not aware of that you, as the head of the department, should audit the work of that person to ensure that they actually did reference everything there? Or, I mean, do you just assume that it's done correctly like we always did? I mean, it's without question that once it's referenced, or in this case, reviewed, that everything in there is properly supported, and there's no need for you to go back and take a look at it.
I absolutely agree with what you just said. I mean, we have professionals that work here, people that are very smart people that are very dedicated. They are not, excuse my language, they are not half-assing it. They are understanding that their responsibility is extremely important to maintaining the credibility of this office, and our work is to make sure the things that are in there are accurate, that they're supported. So we do that. This is a very important step in any audit shop's work, and especially in ours. We need to have that credibility. We can't just say whatever we want to say. It needs to be supported.
Okay, so that hasn't changed. So one further elaboration on that is the setting of scopes. Back when at Arthur Andersen, the way we did things was basically like a matrix looking at probability of risk and materiality of risk. And you focused your efforts where both of those levels are high. And that seems to be exactly the way you've described it. I've been looking around to see if there have been differences holding auditors to their scope selections based on any criteria other than materiality and probability. And I haven't, which doesn't really make any sense to me, but I haven't seen anybody change that. Have there been changes in auditing standards to hold you to a higher standard on your scope selection? Or
I think it's probably the same as when you were doing audit work. I think
it is what it is.
What you described is similar to what I was talking about in terms of our risk assessment, looking at materiality, looking at significance. Those are the factors that we're looking at.
Thank you, Mr. Kondo.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to move on to Chair Yamashita, but I do want to interject one comment here. I should have done this earlier, members. There are some areas as we continue this questioning that may involve potential litigation that ADC is currently involved in. If questioning goes into that area, I will be listening very carefully and then curtailing questions if I find that it's inappropriate because it's active litigation that the agency is currently undergoing. So on that note, Representative Yamashita, you're up for your next question.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have anything at this time.
Okay, Rep. Pruso, you have the next question.
It's not Chair Tarnas.
No, Rep. Pruso followed by Chair Tarnas.
Okay, so I want to first say, as the representative for Wahiawa and Whitmore Village, that the death of Milia Valmoha was a critical turning point. And I think that my community was really grateful for the attention brought to the criminal activity in this audit. So my community felt heard. And while ADC may have engaged in efforts, they were clearly ineffectual. It was a community concern for many years before I even got into office. And it was, nobody felt that ADC was engaged in effective measures. So that said, I did want to ask the auditor a question. So the first question I had, in every conversation we've had about this audit since January 2021, you've cautioned our office to focus on the findings and not on the recommendations of the audit. So I'm wondering if you were ever invited to come discuss the findings and or the recommendations of the audit with the ADC board or with the executive director. And if not, did you ever offer the director or leadership of ADC any support or opportunity for consultation on the findings and or recommendations of the audit?
We did meet with the executive director and his, I'm sorry, I don't know her title, special assistant. When we finished the report, when we provided them with the draft. So when we had our exit conference, it was with the executive director. So we did talk about the findings in the report. In terms of the board, I have offered to the executive director, and I think directly to the board through correspondence, the offer to attend a board meeting to meet and discuss the audit report, answer any questions that they've had or they may have. I think one of the board members reached out to me directly, and I had indicated that if the board was interested, I was available. I think I mentioned that to you as well early, right after the report was issued, that if you communicated with the board, you were welcome to convey my offer to them. I never got a response to any of those offers, but we stand ready to continue that process if the board is so inclined, to talk about the audit, to talk about the findings, and have some further discussion so they can better understand what we're saying, why we're saying whatever we're saying, and to help them improve. And that's the bottom line, is that's our goal, is to make government better, like I said at the beginning. And that truly is our objective, is just to try to help make government better. So to the extent I'm available. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Second question, really quickly. Your audit found that the ADC failed to develop a fiscally and procedurally sound system of land and water management and documentation, and has not even been auditable for many years because their records are in such disarray. ADC's leadership response to the legislature on this issue was that ADC has failed in these areas because they lack adequate personnel, in part. That was the bulk of their response. But ADC enjoys unusual exemptions from civil service hiring and salary constraints, and they have their own funds from license fees with which they can pay staff. So in light of this remarkably favorable funding and staffing flexibility, does failure to fill these vacancies ultimately lie with the director of the agency?
I don't think that's within the scope of our audit representative. I think that's something that you should have a discussion with the executive director and the board. You are correct that the financial records of the agency were not maintained well. And because of that, the financial audit, or the completion of the financial audit, and it's the financial audit for FY19, which ended June 30, 2019, that audit has yet to be completed.
But is that your understanding of their exemptions with respect to civil service requirements?
I don't know that.
They do. So they do have staff that is not general funded. So yes, so they are exempt from civil service. But okay, thank you.
Okay, Chair Tarnish, your question?
Thank you. Thank you, Auditor Kondo, for your presentation. You focused a lot on Oahu. Of course, that was where some high-profile properties are. Kauai has the majority of the acreage that ADC has. Were you able to gather information from ADC about their land management and activities on Kauai? And if not, tell me, about your efforts to get it and whether or not you were successful.
I mentioned that we had asked for tenant files, and the tenant files that we ended up asking for, all of their tenant files, those included their tenants on the Kauai lands, Kalepa and Keikaha. I think, so we did look at the tenant files and what's in those files relating to the licensees on Kauai. I think if your question is about why we didn't look at their land management or their land management with respect to those lands, if I could expand on that a little, Representative? Okay.
Yes, please go ahead. I am interested on that because it just seemed like you were focusing so much on Oahu. I wanted to hear more about Kauai. Go ahead.
No, and you're right. Most of ADC's land holdings, the lands that they have oversight over, are on Kauai. I think it's about 19,000 acres. Kalepa and Keikaha. I think I have a note here that says Keikaha 13,000 about, and Kalepa about 6,000 acres. Now, those lands came to ADC through executive orders. They used to be managed or overseen by DLNR's land division, and they were transferred through the EOs to ADC. I think one in 2003 and one in 2010, if my recollection serves me. Those lands came with tenants. In other words, they were already licensees that DLNR or the land division had entered into those agreements, and those people were on the land already. In addition, I mentioned that both of those areas, Keikaha and Kalepa, they have farmers co-ops or cooperatives that are responsible for and have entered into agreements with ADC, MOUs with ADC to manage the common areas. So those were entities. And on top of that, my recollection is that ADC has a contract with somebody who contracts with a private person or entity to go and do some inspections, routine inspections of those lands, and provides reports to ADC, which include pictures of those lands or the tenants and their use of those lands. So going through the process that I described earlier, our risk assessment, when we looked at risk relating to the ADC's Kauai lands, the risks were low, were not significant because they had ongoing operations there. They had tenants. Most of those lands were occupied with licensees, tenants, farmers. They had an organized process, meaning that you had the co-ops that were overseeing much of the activity. In fact, I think ADC management described the co-ops' responsibility to be maybe even broader than what it is under the MOUs. They're managed by the co-ops. So there was a lot of oversight or other types of activities that were already involved there. When we looked at the lands on Oahu, the Galbraith estate lands and the other lands up in Wahiawa and Whitmore, those lands were acquired by ADC starting in 2012, and they were vacant. They were vacant lands, no tenants, no farmers, and ADC then acquired these lands, some of them maybe with the intent of land banking, but they acquired these lands and now had the responsibility to do something with these lands. Now they're a landowner, now they have to do something. So whether it's to attract the farmers or whether, like I was talking about with earlier about the security of those lands, there were other responsibilities and, using our language, other risks that were associated with their oversight and management of those lands. So in my long-winded response to your question, that's why we risk out the Kauai lands and the management of those lands, and why we focused on ADC's land activities with respect to Oahu.
Okay, all right, that makes it clear why we didn't spend much time talking about Kauai, because you did not see it as a high risk.
Correct.
Okay, I'm curious about the role of, well, I guess there's a Deputy Attorney General that's assigned to ADC, is that correct?
I believe so, but
You had referenced it in your presentation.
We I think referenced the former Deputy Attorney General, which is now the Special Assistant to ADC. Okay, so based on your presentation, I assume that yes, there is a Deputy AG that advised ADC. And there's a lot of very concerning findings that you had. That did you find that through their normal process that the Deputy Attorney General would have to review and approve all of these different transactions, or memorializing licenses? And if they weren't involved, is that a process failure, or could you talk to me about that? That's really a good question. And I don't think that we know what their process is because they don't have documented processes. But we did not look at that. We wanted to find out what is in these files. How are they managing these lands? So we observed and we reported these deficiencies that we saw. They don't have they don't have the documents that we expected. The documents that we see, some of them, they don't, the board minutes, what has been approved by the board, it doesn't match the land, the parcel that is in the license agreement. The license fee, the rent in essence, it doesn't match what the board approved and what the license agreement says. So we reported those errors or those issues, I guess is a better word, but we did not look at this process to ensure that the documents were accurate or quote legal. We were looking at their management process more broadly, not at certain issues that you're discussing or raising. Okay, yeah, because I am usually the Deputy Attorney General is responsible for making sure that everything is done properly and it's compliant with the statutes. And so that's why I was curious whether you actually
determined whether they were properly involved in that review and approval, but it sounds like that was really not something that you focused on. Rather, you're just focusing on what was in the file, whether it was sufficient or not.
Correct. We weren't looking at the process that would have brought in the Deputy Attorney General.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Those are my two questions, Chair. So I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Tarnas. Vice Chair Ichiyama.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Auditor, for being here today. I wanted to follow up on the financial audit of ADC. It's referenced here on pages 4 and 5 of the audit that the auditor retained Acuity as to conduct a financial audit. However, ADC's financial records were not auditable. And according to this text box, that the financial audit was expected to be published January 2021. Can you just provide us with an update on the status of this?
Sure, I surely can. It still has not been issued. In fact, September 16th, what I guess is last week, Thursday, the most recent status update from Acuity, our CPA firm, and I'm going to read it to you. We are currently wrapping up the remaining reconciliation work with KMH. KMH is the other accounting firm that ADC had to hire to help ADC clean up its financial records. I'll read this next paragraph. As the additional adjustments related to the revised tenant balances were posted to the trial balance, KMH reconvened work with ADC on drafting the MD&A. That's the management disclosure. It is our understanding that ADC is currently working on matters related to the House Investigative Committee hearings and may not be available to address outstanding items until after the hearings are finished. So with that last statement, Acuity is unaware or cannot tell us when they have a TBD in terms of when their report will be finished and will be issued, because there are still some outstanding matters that must be corrected by ADC.
Are you able to elaborate on what those outstanding matters are?
There are, initially the problem was there was a lack of some financial records, or the financial records were not kept correctly. So like I said, they hired a CPA firm to help correct that. Now, there's still some things that need to be reconciled. In other words, Acuity looks at certain records and they look at the backup for that, and maybe there's differences. But in terms of the specific records that are still at issue, or the concerns Acuity still has that ADC and KMH need to correct, I'm not aware of that. But still, there's ongoing issues, is I guess the point that I think is the bigger takeaway right now. I think it sounds to me like it's close. We're, the delivery date in the contract for the final report was supposed to be December 16th, 2019. So we're, over a year and a half after that, and we may, sneak up on 2 years after that. But this is not an issue with our contractor who is not performing, pursuant to the contract terms. It is because of the state of the financial records. We've had many meetings that I participated in with ADC, KMH, and Acuity, and it's a struggle.
This is my last question on this area, because as you mentioned, we're auditing records from fiscal year 2019. Has your auditor mentioned, or has there any been a discussion about whether or not, from what it sounds like, reconstructing these records now from so many years ago, as to whether or not that's going to have an effect on the audit, the ability of the audit to be complete, accurate?
Oh, that's a good question. The audit is going to get completed, but there are going to be some significant findings in the report. Just like we make findings, the financial auditors will also make findings. They will find material deficiencies in the audit, in those financial records, and in those processes that ADC has, maybe didn't have, to maintain those financial records, the accuracy of those financial records. So what that will mean is that the opinion expressed by Acuity is very, very, very likely, almost certainly, will have these findings that will say that they cannot say with any reasonable assurance that the information contained in the financial statements of ADC are accurate. Can I make another comment there, Chair, Representative, on this financial audit thing?
Sure, just to wrap up.
Yeah, so we had, this issue with ADC is not unique to ADC. We had very, very similar issues with DLNR and the status or the state of their financial records. Extremely concerning, given that both these agencies hold state land and receive significant revenues from those state lands. The point with ADC is that we had hoped that we would be able to do 2 years of financial audits, but the amount that was appropriated was not sufficient. So I actually went back to the legislature informally to ask that, or for the legislature to consider increasing the amount so that the second year could be completed. I think the 2-year contract that Acuity had given us was either $130,000, if my recollection is correct, or maybe it's $150,000. Yeah, maybe it's $150,000. And because we weren't able to get the additional funding, the first year is $80,000. So we had the additional $20,000. I offered it to ADC if they could come up with the additional $50,000 to do the second year audit, and they were not able to for whatever reason. But I think it's really important and kind of disappointing that we're going to do all this work. ADC is going to do all this work, hopefully correct its accounting process, and then it's going to fall off the table, meaning that at that point, there's going to be no further financial audit of their financial statements for FY20, FY21, or whatever future years. And when the legislature may direct us or direct somebody else to go back and do that, hopefully the new processes that hopefully are implemented to better account for their financial statements and financial records, that they continue and the audit will be clean then. But I don't know. It just seems to me that it would have been great if it would have been able to, if that process, the financial audits would have been able to continue.
Thank you. Appreciate that additional information. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Okay, Auditor Kondo, I have questions just to follow up on this line of questions. So on the Acuity contract, and then I have some basic questions about Yellow Book standards and then scope, and then we'll return to Chair Hashem for the next round of questions. So I think very quickly, just to follow up with Vice Chair's line of questioning, and similar to the request for the contract of the accounting firm that was retained for the SLDF audit, can we please get a copy of the Acuity contract, including any amendments in this matter?
Noted.
Okay, so is that a yes, that we can get a copy of the Acuity contract that includes any other amendments?
Public document, yes, of course.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so because the Yellow Book standards play such an important role in ensuring that the audits that you present to the legislature, and in fact, in any, it applies to auditing offices around the country. I just want to have some basic questions about the Yellow Book standards to know what is currently in operation. So for this matter, the audit was conducted from June 2019 to March 2020. What are the Yellow Book standards that would have applied to this audit? Would it have been the 2011 standards, Yellow Book standards, or was it the 2018?
The 2011 standards.
Okay, can you explain to the committee why it would be the 2011 and not the July 2018?
The July 2018 standards were effective July 1, 2018, and we started our audit in June of 2018.
Okay, I want to just clarify that. The audit says your audit was performed June 2019.
Oh, I'm sorry, 2019. So the 2018 Yellow Book, it's effective July 1, 2019. Our audit started in June 2019. That's why the 2011 Yellow Book is the applicable Yellow Book.
And then the Yellow Book, or GAS, or the government auditing standards, is very clear that you're not supposed to use the more recent ones because of that specific implementation date time. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so I just want to be very clear for the record. What was applicable was the 2011 Yellow Book standards that would have been dated December 2011. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes, 2011 Yellow Book. Those are the standards that are applicable to the ADC audit.
Okay, thank you very much. Now I just want to go to the scope of the audit, and a little bit similar to the SLDF audit. Who did your audit team speak with outside of ADC officials to determine the scope and subject matter of the audit, given that in this situation, unlike in the SLDF, the audit, the bill, House Bill 1561, Senate Draft 2, was actually very broad in determining the scope of the audit. Who did you or your audit team speak with?
I'm very certain that we would have circled through some legislators. I think that we had sent a letter, my recollection is, to both a number of House members as well as a number of senators to have a meeting to kind of talk about ADC and about the bill itself. I don't think any House members attended that meeting, but I recall, Senator Gabbard, Senator Thieland, or then Senator Thieland, Laura Thieland, Senator Favela. There might have been another one of the senators that attended that meeting.
Okay, can you produce that letter to the committee, please? Inviting the members to attend the scope meeting?
Yeah, we can. I mean, I'm going to think about that, Representative. I think that's fine. You have made many requests to get things that are in our work papers. And like I explained in my presentation, work papers are confidential. But I assume some of the members I know some of the members on this call were copied on that letter.
Thank you. And then just to refresh your recollection, so this bill, House Bill 1561, Senate Draft 2, would have been introduced by Chairs Cregan and Chair Luke. Did you invite Chairs Cregan and Luke to this meeting with the Senate?
My recollection is that certainly Chair Cregan was invited. I don't know if Chair Luke was also on the letter or whether she was copied. I think that we were looking at the ag chairs. I think it was Chair Cregan and I think on the Senate side, it was Senator Gabbard.
Okay, yeah. And then in terms of the legislative history, this bill went to the House Committee on Agriculture, who at the time was Chair Cregan. So you recall inviting Chair Cregan, as you stated. And then it went through the Agricultural Senate Committee, which would have been Chair Gabbard. It finally ended in the Ways and Means Committee with Chair Della Cruz. Was Chair Della Cruz at this meeting?
I don't recall. I don't believe so. I think our process would be that we would go and try to talk to subject matter folks and not so much the folks that are, whether it's finance or Ways and Means.
Now, because there was $100,000 appropriation for the finance committee for the financial audit, you just stated earlier that you had to go back for additional funds. So did you make those requests for additional funds for the financial audit to either Chair Luke?
That's not what I said. We didn't have to go back for additional funds. The money that was appropriated was only enough to cover the audit of one fiscal year. So,
okay. And then you previously just said that you informally requested to increase the amount.
That was because, as I was trying to explain earlier, I thought it was a waste if the financial statements from FY19 were the only financial statements that were ever going to be financial. The audit was only going to be of those financial statements, and it wasn't going to continue after all the work and the effort that ADC was putting in to clean up those records and to develop better processes to hopefully ensure that it doesn't happen again. So because of that, I thought it would be great to continue the audit. And we had actually entered into a 2-year contract with Acuity, and it came out in at more than what had been appropriated. So I did go and talk informally, certainly with Finance Chair.
And did you speak informally with finance staff about this increase?
When I speak with finance chair, finance staff is generally in the room. So
Okay, and did you also make the same informal request of the Ways and Means Senator, so Senator Dela Cruz and his staff?
likely,
Okay, can you check and confirm with your records that you did have those conversations with both sets, House and Senate?
I'm sure I don't have records. I'm sure that I do know that I raised it with Representative Luke.
Okay, and you don't recall if you raised it with Chair Dela Cruz?
I don't have that specific recollection, no.
Okay, but you do recall, so you recall with the House member, but not with the Senate?
I don't have the specific recollection, but like I said earlier, I think it's very likely.
Okay, could you check in your, thank you. I'm gonna, so I've asked my scope questions. I'll turn this over back to Chair Hashem.
I really don't have a question. I just want to say, I'm sorry, Auditor, if I seem a little hostile in my questions. I'm just worried about the credibility of your office to ensure that everything in the audit is correct.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. And I hope that you didn't think my response was hostile either. But I was disappointed I was not able to finish my response.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Minority Leader Okimoto.
Thank you, Chair. So Auditor Kondo said he didn't get to finish his response to the previous question. Is this, Chair Belatti, an appropriate time for him to continue with that response, or are you waiting for him to, because I could yield that time for him to answer the question that Chair Hashem had previously. If not appropriate, then I can
re-ask the question.
No, I don't think you need to re-ask the question. I'd like to move on to the next question. Rep. Okimoto, do you have a question for Auditor?
No. I just feel like it's fair if Auditor Kondo wants to finish a thought that we allow him that opportunity. So if you feel that this is not the appropriate time, then I will go on to the next member.
Okay, I have stated that that Auditor Kondo can make closing remarks with respect to a colloquy he had with Chair Hashem. So I'd like to move on to the next question because it's now.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
So any questions, Minority Leader?
No, thank you. No,
Okay.
thank you.
Representative Kobayashi.
Thank you, Chair. So, Mr. Kondo, I just want to follow up on some of the issues related to the ADC policy statements that were raised by Representative Hashem. So it's a little odd to me because I guess one of the things you do when you audit is you look at what's given to you. And, we obviously don't have the ability to just go through every file cabinet or there's nothing sensical about thinking that you should be able to find every document in-house that they may have, whether they offer to you or not. So what the answer to that had always been for financial auditors is we have what we call rep letters or representation letters. So what would have been covered here would have been what we call the client representation letter. And I'm not sure if that's something that's still utilized in government functions, but do they represent to you that they are making true statements in a letter or that they are providing you the documents to the best of their abilities and knowledge if you ask for them?
I guess first they do use rep letters still, but we don't use it in performance audits. We expect agencies to cooperate and be truthful. Just like I told the chair, you don't have to swear me in. I'm coming and I'm going to tell you guys the truth. Every time I talk to legislators and anyone else for that matter, I'm telling you the truth. And that's what we expect from our auditees. And I have no reason to think that anyone that we've spoken to at ADC was not telling us the truth. I think they were being honest and they were being upfront. They were being forthright with the information that they were giving us. The problem is we ask for documents, we ask questions, and if we don't get documents, we don't get documents aren't mentioned in response to questions, then we would not know they're there. I do also want to comment, which I mentioned, is the ADC records were in such disarray. So it is very possible that they didn't give us the document because they didn't have the document. And I got to also comment that if, as Representative Hashem has been insisting, that if they did have these kind of documents, that the exit conference and the response to our audit, those were the opportunities for ADC to raise these issues. The thing about the exit conference, and I tell this to every entity, the reason why we have an exit conference, at least from my perspective, and maybe it's a selfish perspective, is we don't want to look stupid. We don't want to have egg on our face. We want to make sure that if we say something, that it's supported. And if you might not have understood that we were asking for whatever box of documents, and it's in the corner of your room, and we have issued a report, and we say you don't have policies and procedures, for instance, but you have a box in the corner of your office that has the policies and procedures, and you don't think we asked for it, that's the time when we want the agency to say, wait, you didn't ask for this, here's our box. And at that moment, we will go back and we will reassess those findings. That never happened here. We had an exit conference. We had an opportunity to talk about the audit findings, the things that we said in that audit. And ADC never told us, oh, you got some facts wrong. There are things in here that are not correct. ADC never included that in their written comments to the audit. You folks should read that before tomorrow. But if you look at that, there's no comments in there that says, oh, you guys are off. We have written documentation of policies and procedures, none of that. So when I hear it now from Representative Hashem, that's the first time.
Right. So I've looked at the responses made in the exit meeting, and I find that they haven't really said anything about these things at the time. And that was really, I agree. In my experience, that's where they're going to be able to come on to say things and not say, well, nothing, and later on come out and tell others that that was an incorrect statement. So I find that a little bit odd that they would not address that in their exit statement and make comments about it later. But thank you for your answers, Mr. Kondo. No further questions.
Thank you. Representative Yamashita, next for you, first time.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I don't have anything at this time.
Representative Peruso.
Yeah, I do have a question. So you mentioned that the executive director has used rights of entry to give farmers access to grow crops and a profit from ADC lands, and that he did so without seeking board approval or collecting a fee for the privilege of using the land or securing other protections to the state that are included in the licenses issued by ADC. So the executive director has emphasized in testimony to the legislature that there were no explicit findings of fraud or corruption in this audit. But can you explain to the committee how such patterns of behavior by the ED may leave the agency and hence the state open to unnecessary legal risk?
The executive director is correct. We didn't find fraud, but I do want to make the comment that this was not a forensic audit. This is a performance audit. So we are not focused or looking to find fraud. If we run across something that is criminal, we would report that. You know, on Monday, the chair was suggesting or asking about what we would do if we saw something that was criminal. And we definitely would report that to the agency as well as the director. We would raise the flag on that, but that's not our responsibility to look for fraud. To answer your question directly, I think the issue that you're raising, there are concerns there because the right of entry seems to be used for purposes that are outside of our understanding as to what a right of entry is supposed to be used for. To allow a farmer to actually grow crop and use the lands, not just go in to see what the lands look like, do soil testing and whatever else they may want to do before they commit to leasing or licensing the lands. Those are questions that need to be raised to both to the executive director, but perhaps more importantly to the board of directors, whether or not that's appropriate, whether or not the discretion that apparently the executive director enjoys to issue rights of entry without board approval, whether or not that's appropriate, at least from the board's perspective. And again, without these policies, procedures about when rights of entry can be used and the purposes for those rights of entry, and whether or not the executive director has discretion, this is kind of what you get. You get discretion being exercised, whether it's appropriate or not. He thinks it obviously is appropriate, but you and I may have a different opinion, but at the same time, without any clear direction from the board, it's, he's doing what he thinks he's supposed to do or what he thinks is best for the organization. But the board really gets to set the sail, gets to set the direction of that ship. So they determine what is best for the organization. So did I answer your question?
You did. You
Okay.
did. And I'm just concerned about the risk of those
Sure.
patterns of management. And I think my
Can
second.
I add one thing to that? I'm sorry, I interrupted you, but you're right. There's tremendous risk because with other types of agreements, whether it's a revocable permit or a license agreement, there are requirements for insurance, right? There are insurance requirements. There are other requirements that the lessee or the licensee must adhere to. With the right of entry, my understanding is there are no similar requirements, insurance requirements or other such requirements. So you're correct. There is a difference in the exposure to the state, at least from my perspective, between the right of entry and other vehicles that allow farmers to use ADC properties or lands.
Thank you. My second follow-up question is, your audit recommended that ADC update its mission statement to reflect the corporation's purpose more completely as expected by the legislature and to develop goals, objectives, policies, and priority guidelines that detail ADC's development strategy. Director Nakatani's response was to submit a proposal to the ADC board at the August 25th meeting, asking them to keep the mission statement developed when ADC was established in 1994 as is. My question for you is, during the course of the audit process, did anyone in ADC leadership roles or capacity express strong interest in moving the agency towards a 21st century conception of farming and shifting the focus or the purpose or the mission of the agency?
Not that I recall, but I had an informal, quick discussion just in passing with, I'm trying to remember his name, Randy. He's now with Department of Education, used to be the Deputy Director of the Department of, I'm sorry?
Randy Tanaka.
Randy Tanaka, correct. Thank you. And we were meeting for a different purpose. And I think he was the DBED representative, designated representative on the ADC board at the time. And we just mentioned that we were auditing ADC or something. And he was remarking that he had come back from, I think it was Japan or somewhere else, that he had seen some I think what I would consider the 21st century farming where they were growing crop vertically. We were just kind of talking and he was mentioning to me or describing to me what he had seen. So at that time, he was a member of the board. So if you're asking me if anyone ever mentioned something, then the answer is yes. But Randy soon went off to, in fact, I think that was his last day at DBED when I was talking to him. And I think the next day he was moving on to DOE. But in terms of other discussions with the executive director or others, I don't recall those. I don't think that came up.
Thank you.
Okay, Chair Tarnas, before I go to you, I want to follow quickly because I don't want to lose this line of questioning from Representative Pruso. Auditor Kondo, so you've acknowledged that if this was not a forensic audit, and that if it had been, if you had found something criminal, you certainly would have reported it, correct?
Of course.
Okay, so do the Yellow Book standards require reporting of non-compliance with provision of laws to the audited agency for performance audits?
We do that. It's called the audit report. And I hope that's what we've been talking about this whole time. We report what we believe to be non-compliance with the law. But I think what you're talking about, or what your initial question was about, is about fraud, is about criminal activity. So we definitely...
Let me clarify. So I'm asking very specifically, is there a Yellow Book standard that would require reporting of non-compliance with provision of laws to the agency being audited?
I don't know, but I'm telling you that's what we do.
Okay, so if you would have found in the context of her performance audit, non-compliance with provisions of law, you would have informed the agency and its executive management that you had found non-compliance with provisions of law.
We did that, Representative. We did that in the report. We reported that the agency is supposed to do, an ag business plan. They're not doing it.
So thank you. But okay. So then the question, to clarify the question even further, would you have informed them if you came across instances of non-compliance with provisions of law prior to the report being issued during the course of the field work? Does Yellow Book standards require you to inform the agency and their executive management team of this non-compliance or irregularity?
I don't recall. I don't believe so.
Okay.
I don't believe there's a requirement that we inform ADC as we're doing our field work that they have responsibilities to do, for instance, the ag development plan or the ag business plan. I think that probably certainly came up during the course of field work as we asked questions of the executive director and other board members about why they haven't done the ag business plan. So I think that they are very aware that we believe the statute requires them to provide that or prepare that.
And you never, in this case, issued a letter of the sort that I'm talking about, where you came across instances of non-compliance with laws to ADC or its management?
I don't know what you're talking about, but if you're asking if we issued a letter to management about our findings prior to issuing the report, the answer is no.
Okay, so I want to turn to page 20 of the audit, and then I'll turn it over to you, Chair Tarnas, just to be very clear. I appreciate the critical nature of your report, but on page 20, in the second paragraph, you review a number of interactions between Kalena's owner and the executive director about how they might have entered into written agreements or didn't enter into written agreements. Then your staff notes that these services were not procured in accordance with the Hawaii Public Procurement Code, ADC, along with certain other state agency, lost its exemptions from the Hawaii Procurement Code in 2004. So were there, in your investigation, did your committee come across any post-2004 actions that ADC engaged in that may have violated the Public Procurement Code?
We didn't do an investigation. We did an audit. And we added this sidebar here because we think, or this text box, because we think it was reflective of many concerns that we had about how ADC was doing its business, how it was managing its lands, how it wasn't documenting things, how it didn't have these policies and procedures, like Representative Pruso was mentioning, these rights of entry. So the fact that they were doing rent credits in exchange for significant work by a tenant, that raised concerns to us. However, it was not within the four corners of really the audit objectives. We wanted to raise this issue as a highlight for certain things, but the procurement code was not one of the issues within the scope of the objective or the scope of the audit, if that's what you're asking. So we didn't.
So what I'm asking is, your office reviewed over 83 tenant files. And in some of those files, if there was activity post 2004 that should have been or could have been subject to public procurement, if your field workers had found violations of public procurement, would that have been something that you would have discussed, noted as a non-compliance with law, and then informed the agency prior to the filing of the report that they may be in legal jeopardy?
I guess a couple comments. One, we are auditors. We're not attorneys. Some of us are attorneys, but our responsibility is to be an auditor. We're not the attorney general. We're not a deputy attorney general. So I guess the questions that you're asking about violation of laws, certainly we raise questions, but we don't make determinations that they violated the state procurement code. That's not our job. We're raising these issues because they appear odd to us, curious, using your word. So,
let me clarify. It's not that you're determining that there's fraud, but if there's risk of non-compliance with law and your field workers see that, isn't there supposed to be a process where the audit team discusses this and then assesses the risk? And if there is risk, there should be a process to report these non-compliances.
If we had gone through and identified this stuff during our planning process, it very likely would have been part of our risk assessment. But because we weren't looking at procurement, we weren't looking at their procurement activities, we were looking at land management practices, their land management activities. It was not part of our risk assessment. And this is something that we stumbled upon, in essence, as we were doing field work, that we learned that this tenant was doing all of this work in exchange for rent credits. And we thought it was significant enough to highlight that so that ADC legislators, the public, and others would be aware of the practice. And I guess maybe even the board members, because maybe the board members were not aware of the practice of issuing rent credits. And it's not so much just the rent credits, it's rent credits that are not determined, that are left just to be determined years later without really a determination at the beginning. When you enter into a contract, when you have procurement, you know the contract price, you know the scope of work when you sign the document.
Okay, I think we're going far afield. And so just one last question to wrap it up. So I appreciate that you reported it to the agency and to the legislature and to the public in the audit report. But are you required under Yellow Book standards, if you come across this in the field work portion, that you have to also notify the agency immediately so that they can correct any non-compliance with laws?
I mentioned we're not acting as lawyers. We're acting as auditors.
Okay,
right?
Thank you. Thank you for answering the question. Chair Tarnish, your question next.
I don't think it's appropriate to be cut off when I'm trying to answer the question. I'm doing my best to provide you with information and respond to the question, your question and other representatives' question. I don't think it's appropriate, if this is to be fair about it, that you just cut me off and not let me continue and complete my answer. It may not be what you want to hear, but you know what? It's my answer. So I think it would be appropriate to allow me to complete that answer if you are truly trying to understand what we're doing and why we're doing things.
I'm trying to understand, Auditor Kondo, if according to the Yellow Book standards, if you come across in the field work any non-compliance with provisions of law, is there an obligation under the Yellow Book standards to inform the audited agency and its management immediately so that they can correct any problems before the audit report is issued?
What section of the Yellow Book do you think requires that?
Mr. Kondo, I'm asking the question, but I would refer to things, section 6.28 of the Yellow Book standards, of the 2011 Yellow Book standards. And other numerous Yellow Book standards, which I'm sure, very certain that you comply with.
I think the challenge is the interpretation of what the Yellow Book says. We as an audit shop, our auditors are required to go have 80 hours, that's 80 hours of CPE every 2 years. So this is our Bible, so to speak. So what you're referring to is exactly what we do. We consider and identify the provisions of laws, regulations, contracts, or grant agreements that are significant within the context of the audit objectives and assess the risks that noncompliance with the provision of laws, regulations, contracts, or grant agreements could occur. So I was describing our risk assessment process at the beginning. That is exactly what we do when we're looking to identify our objectives. We are considering the laws. We are considering, what the agency is doing. And if we think that there's significant risk that the agency is not complying with laws, that would be considered in that risk assessment. We did not know that at the time. As I mentioned, we stumbled upon this as we were assessing ADC's land management practices.
Okay, thank you. Chair Tarnas, next question.
Thank you very much. You had mentioned that there was just no agricultural development plan. You asked the executive director, where's the plan? He says, I've got it in my head. I don't need to have it written down. Did you find evidence of planning efforts that would be more regional, perhaps, specific to parcels, specific to islands? Did they do requests for proposals for use of land or getting licenses that provide a description of desired outcomes? I'm just looking to see whether there was any evidence of a planning effort on the part of ADC that was made public through any kind of document. It may have been, as I say, an RFP, or was it all just reactive to whoever came along and we wanted to sign up?
First of all, I think the executive director's comment was not about the Agribusiness Plan. It was more about general policies and procedures, or I think in that nature anyway. But to answer your question directly, I'm not aware of any other types of, what you described to be regional plans, and the Agribusiness Plan, that is such a significant document, at least as envisioned by the legislature. So these regional plans or whatever you're describing, I don't think that would substitute for the Agribusiness Plan. It's like when dealing.
But you didn't see any. You didn't see any.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Not that I'm aware of.
I appreciate that you don't think it's the same thing. I appreciate that. That's not. I was just trying to see if there's any evidence that they were doing some planning.
I take that back. I think that they were doing something with respect to a food hub in Wahiawa. I don't know if that would be considered planning. I know that they went, or maybe it was in conjunction with the university or the legislature. I know that they had some plans drawn up by, I think it was the University of Arkansas or something like that, to do a food hub in Wahiawa to help process food. And I think there was some, at least, vision to make it attractive, where there would be even a zip line and there would be a bridge and a connection to Wahiawa from Whitmore. And so I think there was some, quote, planning of that, if that's what you're describing. There was something that went into that to develop this vision of this food hub. So I guess the answer to your question is, I guess I can't just say no. I think that there was some attempt to do something and have some plan with respect to the food hub. But in terms of the development of their other lands, I think they had some plans, maybe not documented, but plans to lease the lands or license the lands. But I mean, that's what they've been doing on a day-to-day kind of ongoing basis. So I'm sorry, I'm not answering your question, I don't think, but we were not aware of any kind of documented regional plans for developing an agricultural business.
Okay, all right. And was there any evidence that you saw of ADC coming up with, like I say, requests for proposals for licensing land to produce crops for export? Since that was explicit, it's something that we wanted, field crops to produce crops for export. Was there any language like that in any of their requests for interest in licensing their land for agricultural purposes?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Auditor Kondo. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair Tarnas. Vice Chair Ichiyama.
No questions. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, I have some simple, I hope one simple factual question, and then a number of questions about kind of content of some of the findings that you found. So first, simple question. Auditor Kondo, your initial examination of ADC's tenant files included 7 of 83 tenants. Can you provide me a list of what those first 7 tenant files were that you looked at?
No.
And the reason for that is?
It's part of our work paper.
Okay. So you're refusing to provide at least just the list so that we can then look at these?
I'm refusing because the work papers are confidential, like I put up in my slide.
Okay, can I ask a question then? Of these 7, were any of these 7 tenant files a Kauai lease, or would have involved Kauai lands?
I don't know. They were randomly selected.
Did your staff ask which 7 to look at, or was it randomly selected by the agency?
Oh, no, I'm certain we randomly selected 7 that we wanted to see. We didn't just ask, give us 7. We asked for these 7.
And would in the random selection, would it have included, say, a representative sample from the various areas which ADC has authority over? So would have been included something from Kauai, something from Oahu?
I'm going to guess the answer is probably yes, just because in terms of the number of licensees they have, the vast majority are on Kauai.
Okay, thank you. I have another question, and then I'm going to turn it back to Chair Hashem next. Okay, and this is a little bit of a sensitive area because this is about active litigation. And so I want to understand, Auditor Kondo, how your office handles information when an agency is undergoing ongoing investigations and legal proceedings. Can you explain the process of how you handle evidence and what you choose to report on if the agency is engaged in ongoing investigations and legal proceedings?
Very carefully. We're very sensitive to not harming the state's position with respect to ongoing litigation.
Okay, so one of the responses, and I want to make this very clear to the public, that this is actually an issue of ongoing litigation currently. And so I'm really just asking about your process, Auditor Kondo, in determining how you decided to talk about Ohana Best when they were engaged in ongoing litigation in your audit.
We reported about facts. We didn't report about whether or not we agreed with Ohana Best's position or even ADC's position. We reported facts. We reported information that came out of Ohana Best's attorney's letters to ADC. Those are facts. That does not in any way, at least in my mind, jeopardize or somehow interfere with ADC's ability to defend itself. In fact, those documents are public documents that would be available to any member of the public upon request. So I don't think that we got anywhere close to jeopardizing or somehow interfering with ADC's, the ongoing litigation that you're describing.
Okay, but the agency did submit in their response to your recommendation, or excuse me, in your response to the draft report that they provided to you, they did request, in fact, that because it was ongoing litigation, they believed it was inappropriate, and they requested that the discussion of the ongoing lawsuit be removed from this report. Is that correct?
That is, and we responded to that in our comments back on the very first page.
Okay, and I just want to be clear with this. So I want to understand, again, why you chose to put Ohana Best in. At page 23, you said, with respect to Ohana Best, we also found that prospective tenants are occupying and farming lands without signed written agreements exposing the state to unnecessary risk, liability, and loss of revenue. For instance, since 2014, Ohana Best Farms has had access to 160 acres of state lands without a license agreement. That statement is in your audit report, correct?
Yes.
So if there were other prospective tenants who were similarly situated as Ohana Best, why did you choose to reference Ohana Best instead of the other prospective tenants so that you could avoid identifying an agent, an entity with which ADC has ongoing litigation? Why did you make that determination?
I'm not sure I understand your question, but Ohana Best was occupying the land. Prospective tenants who we don't know. We reported about another tenant that was occupying land that was not under any kind of agreement, and subsequently was an agreement was signed retroactive to 2016. So we're reporting these concerns, these facts, these conditions, because they illustrate the challenges that ADC has had in terms of managing its lands to ensure that people that are on their lands, using their lands, actually have an agreement to use those lands. And, you know, like my discussion with Representative Caruso about the use of rights of entry, there's significant exposure to the state if people are allowed to occupy, use state land without an agreement.
Okay, so I just want to, you just said that you found another tenant who was similarly situated as Ohana Best. And rather than identify that tenant, you chose to identify Ohana Best. Is that correct?
Ohana Best has litigation with ADC. So, you know, like I said earlier, it's not a secret who Ohana Best is. We reported in some of the information that you're referencing, we reported information from Ohana Best's attorney, public information in a public document. So we didn't have any reason to not reference Ohana Best.
Okay, if you said that that other tenant was identified and it was like Ohana Best, but then in the report you chose not to identify that tenant.
We did identify that tenant.
Who is that tenant?
We identified that tenant as an anchor tenant, a significant tenant on the Galbraith property, the tenant that was using the properties without an agreement, and the agreement subsequently signed retroactive to 2016. We identified concerns about that tenant getting rent credits for work that they were doing, like I explained earlier. So we identified.
So the question is that identified rent tenant, did that tenant have active litigation with ADC?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, so Auditor Kondo, Yellow Book Standard 6.35 of the 2011 Yellow Book Standard says, avoiding interferences with investigations or legal proceedings is important in pursuing indications of fraud, non-compliance with provisions of law, regulations, contracts, or grant agreements, or abuse. When legal proceedings are initiated or in process, auditors should evaluate the impact on the current audit. In some cases, it may be appropriate for the auditors to work with investigators or legal authorities or withdraw from or defer further work on the audit or a portion of the audit to avoid interfering with an ongoing investigation or legal proceeding. From that language, is it a value, is it a principle, a guiding principle in the Yellow Book Standards that you should try to avoid interfering with ongoing legal proceedings?
That's what it says. I guess the answer is yes.
Okay, so if you were given a choice to identify a tenant who does not have ongoing litigations, but has a similar problem, similarly situated with another tenant who has ongoing litigation, wouldn't the Yellow Book Standards dictate that you should not include the name of the tenant or the individual with whom the acting agency, the audited agency, has ongoing litigation?
No, I think that you misunderstand what that says, and I think that you are talking apples and oranges. So like I explained earlier, we complied with this section. We assessed whether or not what we reported would interfere with the ongoing litigation. And like I have described earlier, we determined the answer is no. We reported facts things that are publicly available, probably in the complaint itself, but from documents, public documents from Ohana Best's lawyer. So to answer your question,
okay, but let's be clear. The allegations in a complaint are not yet facts if the litigation is ongoing.
if you're asked, that's true. I agree with that. But what you read, it says interfere with an ongoing investigation. Like I said way earlier, that we're very careful and sensitive to the fact that there is ongoing litigation. And we did not assess or report any opinion as to the merits of anything, right? We reported a situation that raises concerns to us and should raise concerns to you folks about how private entities are being allowed to occupy state lands without any kind of agreement. And clearly a misunderstanding between these two parties that has resulted in litigation.
Thank you, Auditor Kono. I agree with you that it raises serious concerns and that we're looking at it, but is it a matter of professional judgment, fairness, and objectivity, according to the Yellow Book standards, that should have led you to perhaps exercise that judgment to not report on Ohana Best, but on these other entities that you had investigated for which there was no active litigation?
We didn't investigate anybody. We audited. And I keep reminding the committee that we are not investigators, which is a significant distinction. And anyway, I'm not going to beat that dead horse, but we're not investigators. The answer to your question is no, because we determined that there was no interference. Nothing that we were reporting would have interfered with the ongoing litigation. I keep repeating that. That's what's our assessment. We looked at it very carefully. We saw what ADC requested. We had that discussion in our exit conference, as we should. They included it in their written response. We discussed it. We explained why we did not feel that we had to withhold that information, not report that. We thought it was significant enough that we wanted you or the reader to understand what was going on. You know, if it was insignificant, immaterial, then certainly we would not have included it, but that's not the case here. It illustrates a significant challenge that ADC is experiencing.
Thank you, Auditor. And then this discussion, this risk assessment would have been documented in your working papers and demonstrated that you and your staff had reviewed all of these considerations and then made the choice to pick one tenant over another to describe and use as an illustration.
No. You see, the risk assessment is a process that we use after the planning is done. It's part of our process to identify what the audit objectives are. So that happens well in advance of what you're talking about and what we're discussing. So the risk assessment ends the very first phase of the 4 phases of our audit. It ends the planning phase. At that point, we now have objectives. So we do assess the risk for these key activities. This is not that. This is not a key activity that we did a risk assessment. We assessed the significance of any program risk. So if you're asking me, did we do a risk assessment? Is that reported in our risk assessment? The answer is no, because that was not part of the key activities that we assessed. It's something that we reported, and it's something that we discussed with ADC at the exit conference and that we responded to in our written comments back to ADC.
Okay, thank you, Auditor Kondo. Members, it is now coming upon 12 noon, and I did represent that we were going to try to conclude this, but I know that there might be other questions, and so there are other questions? No. Okay. Okay, I have a few more questions. So Auditor Kondo, let's see. Auditor Kondo, can we have you return on tomorrow after we have the presentation by ADC at approximately...
I'm happy to stay, Representative. I got nothing to do except eat lunch.
No, thank you, Auditor. But it has to do with the fact that we have to schedule all our members. And so I'm looking at tomorrow's calendar and looking to see if at 2 p.m. members and Auditor Kondo, if we could have you to return for questions. And we will quickly issue a subpoena to continue this questioning at 2:00 p.m. tomorrow. Members, if you could all turn on your screens for those who are not present in the room. And I would just like to get affirmation with nodding of your heads that 2:00 p.m. we can return tomorrow. Okay.
Chair, I have a conflict, but
I have one as well, Chair. I'll talk to you offline. If it's 2 p.m., I have a conflict.
Okay, I'm looking at Chair Ichiyama and Chair Hashem, 2 p.m. tomorrow. Okay, members, I believe that will provide us quorum. So we will amend or extend the subpoena. And in an abundance of caution, Auditor Kondo, I'll reissue the subpoena. Can we deliver that to your office as well as email it as qualifying for service of the subpoena?
I don't know what qualifies for service for your committee subpoena. So whatever your process is, that's what you should do.
Okay,
I don't know what service means.
I'm asking you, Mr. Kondo, will you accept service of the subpoena to continue this taking of testimony to tomorrow at 2:00 p.m.?
Would I accept it? If you're subpoenaing me, then I assume that I would accept service. I'm not going to run away and hide.
Okay, so our process.
I don't know what you're asking, Chair. I don't know what question you're asking me. If you're going to subpoena me,
I'm asking if you'll accept service via hand delivery to your office and via email, as we've been doing with the other subpoenaed witnesses in this proceeding.
I don't know what the committee's process is, what constitutes service. I mentioned to you at the beginning that I was not served personally with the subpoena for today, but that's not a huge deal because I'm here to talk to you folks. That's my job. So
I'm going to explain now what our process has been and is of this committee. We will serve the subpoenas to you in person. We will have our Sergeant of Arms deliver it to your office. And if you will accept service there in person or have your secretary accept service, that would constitute service. In addition, it is the process of this committee to serve the subpoenas via email to subpoenaed witnesses. So we do it both in person and via electronic means. Will you accept the subpoena in these ways?
if that's the committee's process, I don't know what you're asking me. If you're asking me, are you following the committee's rules or processes? I don't know. I don't know what you're asking me, Chair. If that's the committee's process that you have, then
Okay,
I don't know what you're asking me.
I'm asking, will you accept service of it via delivery to your office or via email? This is a simple yes or no question.
If that's the process, then I don't know why I have to answer yes or no. If that's the process, then fine.
Okay.
I'll comply with whatever the process is. And I don't have that stuff in front of me. So I'm not trying to be difficult. You're asking me questions though that seem to be about your process. And so I comply with whatever your process is.
Thank you, Mr. Kondo. And I will take that from your answer to mean that you will accept service both via delivery to your office, in which case you or your secretary will receive it, as well as via email. So I will take that as a concurrence that you will accept service in those two manners. Now, thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Kondo, and we will continue this tomorrow. Members, in an abundance of caution, we're going to take a vote to extend the testimony of Mr. Kondo to continue tomorrow, September 21, 2:00 p.m. Hawaii Standard Time. Any questions, members?
Chair, how long do you anticipate going?
I don't anticipate it being more than 1 hour. Okay. All right. Any discussion from the committee members? All right, seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote.
Chair's recommendation is use the subpoena as noted. Chair, Vice Chair vote aye. Rep. Hashem. Rep. Kobayashi.
Aye.
Rep. Caruso.
Aye.
Rep. Tarnas.
Aye.
Rep. Yamashita.
Aye.
Rep. Okimoto.
Aye.
Chair, the recommendation is adopted.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Thank you, members and Auditor Kondo for a very productive hearing. There's a lot for us to contemplate and continue to look at as we continue to investigate both the numerous documents that ADC has provided us and the information that we are gathering, the testimony we're gathering in these Chapter 21 hearings. At this moment, members, we are adjourn, and we will return tomorrow for questioning by ADC and continued questioning with Auditor Kondo. Members, we are adjourned.